Disc 4.
When she unclipped her garters and rolled her stockings off, he saw that her legs were smooth and tan. He stroked them and said, "Sit on my lap." She made herself comfortable, then leaned forward a little and kissed him briefly on the forehead, took her panties off and said, "Get undressed, Ricard. And while you're at it, can we have music?" He did as she asked, wobbling a little when he stood. Then he walked over to a radio on the bedside table. She watched every step, enjoying the show. Ricard turned the radio on and worked the needle around the dial, passing a serious conversation, German political propaganda, a comedian with a laughing audience, brassy circus music, a heavy symphony, then at last Glenn Miller, Moonlight Serenade. He returned to the sofa. She sat again on his lap and nestled close to him, her arm around his neck. "Look what I found," she said, her hand between his legs. Ricard stroked her as before, then moved his hand beneath her. She was very warm there, gently at first, and slowly. He began to move his fingers back and forth. Then faster, pressing harder, encouraged by the change in her breathing. At last she made a quiet sound, an "oh," closed her eyes, swayed, and fell back against him. After a moment she said, "Let's turn off the lights." He turned off the lights, and they lay facing each other on the couch. A few minutes later he thought she might be asleep, but she wasn't. Ricard lit a cigarette, and by the flare of the match saw that she was staring at him. The look in her eyes, tender, warm, and radiant. Love in time of war, he thought. In the morning, heavy cloud overhead as fog settled on the city and softened the outlines of the buildings. Ricard liked fog. He used it in his books and enjoyed it in person. The real Paris made into a real noir film, and somehow it shrouded the noise of the city. Ricard, feeling the effects of the cocaine and the whiskey, had to peer through the gloom, using street signs to find his way home. He thought about Leila as he walked, about certain moments, about what they might do the next time they were together. When he was a few steps away from the Rue de la Huchette, he saw a Renault parked in front of a café. He had to squint to see the driver. It was Théodore, the British agent. Théodore said, "The civil servants in London want you to go to Saint-Nazaire, where the Germans have occupied the submarine base. The London message was urgent, because British and Allied shipping is being destroyed from there. Now the London people have bought a cafe in Saint-Nazaire, so you'll have cover for operations there. The cafe is called Le Relais, and you will act as owner and manager." "What about Kasia?" "She'll stay in Paris. They want her to do other things." "When do I go?" "Today or tomorrow." "Then I'd better go home and pack my bag." Saint-Nazaire, the heart of the beast. Ricard had been there before and found it a busy commercial port. The town was located at the southern end of Brittany, near the town of Nantes, where the river Loire emptied into the Atlantic. Once upon a time, the port had been a sleepy Breton fishing village. In 1914, it grew into a town known for its dry docks and shipbuilding industry, and its maisons tolérées, its brothels. Now it was a war city. Walking from the railway station to the Place Marceau, site of the Café Le Relais, Ricard passed naval guard posts, where twice he had to produce his papers. The Germans were taking no chances here because this was the front line of the U-boat war. Anti-aircraft positions every other block, their crews lounging on the emplacements, sitting on purloined garden chairs, smoking, sunning themselves, waiting for the next RAF attack. It would come. For every submarine damaged, more than a few merchant ships survived. On a street that faced the waterfront, Ricard saw a beached U-boat, its superstructure bent and twisted by gunfire, where wounded sailors in Kriegsmarine uniforms were being carried off the boat on stretchers. Many buildings had been hit by RAF bombs. Facades tumbled into the street, revealing piles of wreckage, mounds of burnt brick and broken glass. The Germans clearly could not protect the town. What they could protect, Ricard saw, were the U-boats themselves, which were berthed in a line of pens beneath a concrete roof 30 feet thick. In time he reached the Place Marceau, a block from the waterfront where he found the Café Le Relais. The interior was dark. A hand-lettered sign on the door said Fermé. Not far from the Place, he found the office of the notary, its windows boarded up where he retrieved the keys to the café and the names of its 3 former employees. The barman, Louis, the waitress, Marcel, and Victorine, Vicky, the cook. He found 2 of them right away, left a note for the 3rd, and they showed up the following day, ready to put the café back in order. Louis the barman was short, with slicked back hair, and talkative, rattling on endlessly about nothing in particular. A barman's stock in trade, never politics. Bad manners in France to raise such issues. Instead, observations on life in general, customers always had something to say about that. Marriage, family, work. And Louis, who preferred his name said in the English manner, Louis, had a real gift for chatter about the weather. He'd lived his whole life in Saint-Nazaire, and he knew when a storm was coming, or when they needed rain, or how long the humidity would stick around. A true prophet of the weather, Louis the barman. Marcel, the waitress, was 50-ish, and seductively plump, still worth ogling in her snug waitress uniform, black dress and white apron, and Ricard ogled her attentively as she washed down the 12 tables in the café, Ricard daydreaming about finding themselves alone after work. As for Vicky the cook, she was 70, white-haired and foul-mouthed. "Ah, fuck this fucking thing," she would say of her whisk. Vicky always had a cigarette dangling from her lips. She never flicked it, simply let the ash fall into the omelette or the soupe de légumes. Ricard, suddenly the manager of a café, planned to work behind the bar. He learned to operate the glass-washing device, a grill with a spout below it that shot a spurt of cold water into the upside-down glass. That was it. No soap, no sponge, just one squirt, and after a swipe with a bar towel, the glass was ready for the next customer. As for the food and drink supply, Ricard was that day visited by a short, squat fellow in a chalk stripe, double-breasted suit, his provisioner, known as Pinky. Pinky laid it out for him. "We always have fish. You buy it on the dock when the fishing boats come in at night. There's some mackerel and sea bass, but mostly you'll get cod. Everybody in Saint-Nazaire eats codfish. We're raised on it. But if you want to serve more than cod, you'll have to buy from the farmers. Maybe once a week, a scrawny old chicken for the soup. They grow lentils and haricots, beans, white and black. There's a farmer a few miles from town who owns a milk cow, and once a week he sells cheese. Hard yellow cheese. I don't think it has a name. We just call it cheese." Pinky paused a moment, then said, "As for the wine and the beer, that you'll buy from me. Early in the occupation, the Germans took all the wine back to Germany. Or at least, they think they did. Let's say they took bottles with fancy labels, Chateau this and Chateau that, but the wine itself isn't what the label says it is. It's Chateau made last week. The vintners are some of the craftiest people in this country, and that's saying something. If you want the real thing, you have to go down to the wineries and buy it in plain bottles. As for the beer, it's the same story, the old name's all right, but made right here in Saint-Nazaire, where the labels are printed. Ricard, behind the bar, searched the shelves below the bar and poured out a Hennessy cognac. Pinky drained the tiny glass and smacked his lips. "Thank you, my friend," he said, and Ricard poured him another. So, for a time, it went. Louis poured the drinks and gossiped with the customers. Vicky cooked the food and Marcel served it. The winter waned in February. A few nice days, warm sun and blue skies as a tease. Then back to chill winds and darkness at 4 in the afternoon. March came in like a lion and went out like a lion. The patrons had to pull hard on the cafe door because the wind wanted it open. There followed the rains of April, that year a month true to its songs. But the rain didn't beat down as it had in winter. There were days when it could have been May, and people left their umbrellas at home. Every morning, Ricard looked out at the sea, calmer now, and felt that his life was improving with the season. Marcel knew he liked her, and encouraged his interest, her body touching his as though by accident, as they went about the daily chores of running a cafe. Once they opened, Ricard found that the cafe was being used as a clandestine letterbox. People stopped by and left messages, which were then picked up the next hour, or the next day. It wasn't a hard job, but Ricard knew it could be dangerous. A prize for the Gestapo who could have followed the visitors or arrested them then and there, and likely Ricard as well. Meanwhile, the U-boats returned home from hunting, or sometimes didn't. The RAF bombed the city now and again. Windows were boarded up, no glass, and funerals were held. There had been a serious raid in March, the submarine pens and docks damaged. Repairs were made and the battle at sea continued. According to the BBC, the Wehrmacht was advancing towards the city of Stalingrad but was periodically pushed back and had to fight once more to regain lost territory. Then, one afternoon in April, Theodore left a note at the cafe, and Ricard met him at an open-air fish market. "One of the Polish resistance groups in London," Theodore said, "is planning to run an operation here in Saint-Nazaire, and they want you to work with them." "Who are they?" "They are the resistance movement of the Polish upper class, known as the Cichociemni, the silent and unseen. They've been operating against the Germans since 1941. A woman wearing a rubber apron emptied a bucket of ice on a zinc-covered stand stocked with herrings, and the two men moved away from her. "When do I meet them?" Ricard said. "There's a representative here, back in the office." Theodore walked Ricard down an aisle that led to the office, then disappeared. In the office, the Polish representative was leaning on the edge of a desk, drinking a cup of coffee. The man greeted him as Monsieur Ricard, then said, "Sometimes I use the name Eric." He'd been born and raised in Poland, he told Ricard, but had been living in Paris since the mid-30s. He was clearly an upper-class gentleman, tall and thin, once an athlete, someone who could have lived a life of leisure if he'd wanted to, but the attack on Poland had led him, and some of his friends, to form a resistance organization. His French was fluent and sophisticated, his clothing expensive and casual. Blazer jacket, open-collared shirt, and a diamond-patterned slip-over sweater. Have you been in Saint-Nazaire a long time? He asked. 3 months. I'm running a cafe. Not a bad job. People, all sorts, day and night. Where do you live? In Paris? Here and there, Eric said, with a smile both friendly and deflective, for the time being. Paris is the heart of the world to me. But until the war is over, I can't settle down. You know the law of the fugitive. Don't sleep in the same place for more than one night. Well, I don't quite do that, but truth is, I don't stay anywhere for long. I'm forever a stranger, but that's how it is when you do clandestine work. Looking over Eric's shoulder, Ricard watched a U-boat leaving the dock. Eric turned to see what had caught his attention and said, "There goes a Type 9 submarine, the Germans' top-line U-boat. It has all the latest technology, but it needs a lot of sailors to operate. A crew of 48, all volunteers." "Not for me," Ricard said. "The idea of being underwater." For this operation, Ricard brought Kasia from Paris. Her job was to watch the German barracks and memorize the schedule kept by the sailors, as they were brought by bus to the U-boats at the dock. The buses were painted naval grey and had wire mesh that protected the windows from hand grenades. Kasia, to blend in with the local population, wore a grey shawl over her head and an old overcoat. Still, she was noticed. On the afternoon of her second day at this job, she was confronted by a German guard, a classic Prussian type, with a lavish moustache groomed to a point at each end. He came up behind Kasia, put a hand on her shoulder and turned her around. "Your papers, Fräulein," he said, very stern and official. Kasia produced her papers. The policeman looked at them and said, "What are you doing in Saint-Nazaire? These papers allow you to live in Paris." Kasia was startled, put a hand to her heart and said, "You frightened me, officer." "I'm waiting for your answer. You've been around here since yesterday." Kasia nodded, tears starting in her eyes. "I'm waiting to see my friend."
"Are you? And does your friend have a name?"
"He is called Franz, officer. Franz Miller." Now 2 tears rolled down Kasia's cheeks.
"And Franz is in the Navy?"
"That's what he told me."
"And he is, I would guess, a very good friend, a very close friend."
Kasia said, anguish in her voice, "I just wanted to see him, to talk to him."
"Because you are in love with him?"
"Because I am pregnant." The old-fashioned Prussian shook his head. "Too much sin in the world now.
I can do one of 2 things with you, young lady. I am sorry for your predicament, but you can't linger at military installations. So I will have to take you to the police station, or you can be on your way. Some day you will see France again, but not now. Which shall it be?"
Kasia took a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped away her tears. "I will go away from here," she said. The policeman patted her shoulder and said,
There, it will all come right in the end."
Ricard and Kasia rented a room in Saint-Nazaire to use as a base of operation, made contact with Jacques, Kasia's gangster friend, at a seaside bar, and the 3 had dinner at the hotel, then waited until 10 in the evening to enter the port office. It was Eric who had ordered the intrusion, needing a way to surveil the port. In front of the 2-story building, a sailor wearing a holstered sidearm guarded the front door. Quietly, Jacques led them around to the alley that ran behind the building. At the back door, no guard. Jacques took a metal key used to open a sardine tin and carefully jimmied the lock open. Then, using a torch, they entered the port office. On the ground floor, a directory showed the office of the port captain to be in room 27 on the first floor. The office was unlocked, and the three entered. Then Ricard rummaged through the files to find what he wanted: an entry permit and a refitting order, in this case for U-boat 521, the Freya. Ricard took that and a few other papers that he thought Eric might use later. They left through the back door. Jacques had made sure it could be relocked, and walked through the warm night back to the hotel, where Ricard paid Jacques $200 American. In the hotel room, Ricard shared the bed with Kasia. Restless, Ricard left Kasia sleeping and looked out of the window. A bus, painted grey with grilled windows, moved slowly up the street, taking a crew to their U-boat for a nighttime departure. The following day, Ricard and Kasia took the train back to Paris, while Jacques went off on his own. Kasia returned to her room near the stockyards. Ricard went back to his garret on the Rue de la Huchette. The lights on the dock came on at 7 p.m. Then that night, the RAF, in wave after wave of bombers, badly damaged the port of Saint-Nazaire. The BBC reported it. The Parisians talked about it. And the general feeling was that it would take some time to rebuild. The civil servants held a meeting in April. Not in London, where the German bombing had changed the city. Gentlemen could no longer go to their clubs because their clubs had been turned to rubble, along with the streets where they'd stood. So they met at one of their number's country houses in Sussex and made several decisions. They would continue to use Ricard as their operative in occupied France. He would work for Leila, and also for a man called Adrien, a dependable veteran spy who would approach Ricard as soon as possible. The most important task for Ricard would be the theft of one of the new German torpedoes. The British had the detonator thanks to Ricard and his friend Kasia, and now at the urgent demand of the defense ministries they wanted the torpedo itself. For this operation, theft of one of the new German torpedoes, the civil servants had a candidate, an expatriate American of French descent called De Roche, who did not leave France with the other expatriates when the Germans arrived in 1940. De Roche was big and burly, a great, fat, jolly fellow, a Falstaff with a black eye patch who worked as a film editor at the movie studios in Joinville. It was there that Leila recruited him. "I've been waiting for the resistance to come around," he'd said. "Now give me a job." Ricard went back to Saint-Nazaire, and he and De Roche watched the naval base from a rooftop and waited for a diversion. It came on a drizzling April evening. That night the RAF hit hard. A squadron of British Sterling bombers appeared, their arrival greeted by massed anti-aircraft fire, floods of red tracer rounds streaming into the night sky. One of the RAF bombers was hit. Its engine caught fire, and by firelight, parachutes were seen, drifting towards the sea. Sitting in the passenger seat of a delivery van, Ricard felt his heart pounding. But when the action started, the fear melted away. Ricard drove the truck up to the gate, showed the guard his stolen entry permit, and the man waved him through. Off a dirt road on the other side of the gate, he found the metal shed where the torpedoes were stored. An armed sentry at the door held up his hand and said, "Halt!" The time for finesse had passed, so De Roche took a .45 automatic from his leather jacket and shot the guard, who fell to his knees. De Roche shot him twice more, and he rolled onto his back. De Roche and Ricard ran to the door of the shed and found it padlocked, but it took only one kick from the powerful De Roche The door splintered and swung open. Inside the shed, Ricard's torch illuminated rows of torpedoes strapped to hand trucks. Ricard chose one, but he could barely move it. Then Desroches took over and wheeled the torpedo past the guard's body and put it into the van. Early the next morning, 2 Gestapo officers drove up to the shed, where a French detective called Guarini and a German naval officer were waiting for them. Guarini, a Corsican with dark complexion and black hair, did the police work. Identified the dead guard, found the 3 shell casings and put them in a paper bag, and searched the immediate area for other clues. He looked for tire tracks on the dirt road, but the dirt was dry and hard and the vehicle had left no trace on its surface. As the Gestapo officers watched him work, one of them said, "What caliber?" "They used a .45, Guarini said. "An American weapon?" the officer asked. "Maybe," Guarini said, "but .45 caliber automatics are manufactured all over Europe. Still, if I had to guess, I'd say this particular weapon was the Browning model carried by the American military." The officer took a notepad from his pocket and wrote down, "Killer used an American .45 automatic." Then he said, "So we might assume that the killing was done by a resistance cell in France. The resistance is partial to slow, heavy bullets that stop a victim in his tracks." Guarini hesitated, then said what the German officer wanted to hear. "I think it's a good possibility. Who else would steal a torpedo? It's not something you can sell." Then he called over to the German naval officer. "Only one torpedo gun?" The naval officer said, "Looks like it. The inventory will have to be examined, but I suspect that only one torpedo was taken." "So, we have here the operation of an intelligence service, likely a British intelligence service. They are the ones who worry about convoys and torpedoes, and they know our submarines are based in Saint-Nazaire," the Gestapo officer said. "And it has to be a local operation. Our shore surveillance did not pick up a boat landing." "A few weeks ago," Guarini said, "one of our spies reported that a torpedo detonator was taken by one of the Polish laborers who work at the factory where the detonators are manufactured. We don't know what became of it." The Gestapo officer grimaced. "Goddamn Poles," he said. "They won't give up. They stole a detonator. Then they came back for the torpedo. What's next? A submarine?" The Safe House. July had usually been a pleasant season in Paris, sunny and warm. But during the last week of the month in 1943, temperatures climbed into the 90s, the air humid and still, with no relief at night for a city built of absorbent stone. On the hottest, stickiest nights, the Parisians couldn't sleep. They tried, stripped down and lay still on damp sheets, but soon enough rose and sat by their open windows, smoking cigarettes in the dark. Paul Ricard, sweltering under the slate tiles of his garret roof, made a telephone call, then went off to see his friend, Romani, up on the fancy Avenue Bosquet. He found a taxi and gave the driver the address. They never got there. On the Rue Saint-Dominique, another taxi hit the front wheel well of Ricard's. Now the drivers cursed each other as a crowd gathered on the street. Ricard sat in the back seat, wiping sweat from his face with a handkerchief, and told himself to be patient. These little accidents happened. Now one had happened to him. 10 minutes later, 2 policemen appeared. The sergeant in charge told Ricard to get out of the taxi, then watched him carefully as he complied. Something is wrong. The idea drifted up from his subconscious and took root. These weren't Parisian flics. The uniform was right, but they didn't quite act like the police he was used to. Too polite, he thought, like actors playing police in a play. Parisian police were polite on the surface, but they were ready to hit you with their lead-weighted cape or their baton if you showed defiance. And somehow they let you know it. "Your papers, monsieur?" For a passenger. Well, maybe a witness. For such a gentle little bump. Ricard was trying to make something normal of the event, but he couldn't. He handed over his papers. The flic took them and walked away. Ricard panicked. Without papers, especially under the occupation, you didn't exist. Ricard ran after the policeman. "My papers," he said. "I understand, monsieur. Come to the Préfecture tomorrow morning, 116 Rue de Grenelle, and we will return your papers." Followed by the traditional salute. Index finger to brim of képi. No going to see Romani now, he thought. He headed quickly for home, feeling vulnerable and exposed without his papers. Back in his garret, Ricard worried and paced. He tried to work on his novel, but he couldn't concentrate. Usually, no matter the trouble, this helped. Transported to another world where his fictional characters had a life of their own, he left his daily reality and lived in the world he had built for them. A much easier place to live. He couldn't stop brooding about the faked accident. And suddenly he thought, I am being prepared. The Gestapo wanted something from him. What other reason could there be? He was to play a role in some theatre of intrigue they had constructed. So then, how to say no? How to say no without being tortured and shot? And his interior voice wasn't done with him. You will have to do what they tell you. Or seem to. Or pretend to. The following day he went as instructed to the Préfecture. The flics were courteous as they handed over his papers. From Ricard, a deep, though silent sigh of relief. The bastards had scared him. As he turned to leave the Préfecture, a voice said, "Ricard." He turned to face a Gestapo officer who had appeared from an office adjacent to the reception counter. "Step inside," the officer said, holding the door open for him. Ricard entered the office. "I am Major Erhard Geisler," the officer said. Ricard sat across the desk from the officer. "I am going to give you a chance to help us, and to help yourself." "Yes," Ricard said, then added, "Sir?" His heart was beating hard. "Your residence permit for Paris. May I see it?" Ricard handed over the document. The officer studied it and said, "I see you keep it up to date." "I follow the rules, sir," Ricard said. "Smart fellow," Geisler said. "And you know what happens to those who don't follow the rules." Geisler didn't draw a finger across his throat. He didn't have to. A certain tone in his voice did that job for him. But Geisler didn't hand the residence permit back. He put it in his desk drawer. "I'll just keep this for a while. If you are stopped at a street control, you can tell them where your residence permit is." "Won't I be detained?" "You may well be, but it will all be worked out when the police contact my office. Now, a certain committee has been established, the Union Nationale des Écrivains, the National Writers' Committee, and you've been enrolled as one of its members. The job of the committee is to make sure that writers of all political views are read by French readers. At this time, that isn't the case. Writers of the left, that crowd from the Deux Magots, are popular, but Europe is changing, and it is time for French intellectuals, among others, to understand that. Now, you have questions?" "No, sir." "Then I'll wish you a good day." Ricard had no intention of trying to live in Paris without a permit, and he wasn't going to let these bastards rule his life from a desk drawer. so he visited a specialist in false papers, known as a shoemaker. The shoemaker lived in the Marais, in a small hotel on a square off the Rue des Plâtres. He was an artist, this shoemaker, working at a desk piled with counterfeit rubber stamps, pens, and bottles of the purple ink used by bureaucrats. Typing Ricard's name on a residence permit, he said, "I've never been so busy, but I'd like to go back to forging checks and documents. This occupation is hard on my nerves." In 15 minutes, Ricard was again approved for residence in the city of Paris. Ricard telephoned Colonel Deroux that afternoon, and the following day took the train up to Les Andelys. Colonel Deroux met him at the station with a horse and wagon, and slowly crossing and recrossing the Seine, they made their way to the colonel's house. Nadine, the colonel's sheepdog, had come along for the ride, sometimes barking at the cows in the fields, sometimes leaping from the cart to investigate something that interested her, then catching back up to the cart and jumping in. At the colonel's house they had lunch, a tough chicken stewed in wine with onions, and the yellowish curved potatoes known as rate. Over lunch, Ricard told Deroux about the Polish resistance and the German U-boats. Deroux was both delighted and amused. "The Poles go on forever," he said. "They fight back so the enemies on their borders think twice before they try any nonsense." Then Deroux said, "Do you know the waterways of France, Monsieur Ricard? The canals and the navigable rivers?" "I don't. The names of most of the rivers, those I know, but after that—" "It's quite a system, though most people really aren't aware of its extent." "I believe there may be a lot of canals, a lot of rivers." Deroux nodded and said, "There are, more than you would imagine. Let's go to my map room and have a look." August. Now the real heat of the summer arrived, and Parisians fled the city, gathered in friends' country houses if they didn't have their own, or stayed at small pensions, breakfast and dinner included. Ricard and Desroches took rooms at one of them, near the village of La Fontaine, on the Loire. On a cloudy afternoon, the hotel kitchen prepared a picnic for them. Then they rented horses at a local stable and rode along a dirt path by the river. At first, Ricard, very much a city boy, knew he was going to fall off, his legs spread wide in the saddle. But the horse was a gentle beast, and used to inexperienced riders, so walked at a slow pace in the summer heat. There was a boat rental facility at La Fontaine, with a machine shop where they repaired rivercraft, mostly barges, and the tugboats that towed them. They found the proprietor working at a forge, sweat soaking through his shirt as he hammered a bent propeller blade back to its proper shape. The proprietor lifted his welding shield up to his forehead and said, "Gentlemen, what can I do for you?" Lying on a table was his hat, a much battered and faded naval cap. "We're staying at La Fontaine," Ricard said. "August vacation?" "Yes, it's too hot to stay in Paris." Ricard opened the wicker case that had held their picnic and produced a bottle of white Bordeaux. "Can we offer you a drink?" he said. "I wouldn't mind," the proprietor said. Desroches took a multi-blade knife from his pocket and used the corkscrew blade to open the wine, pouring it into 3 glasses he took from leather straps that were looped atop the picnic hamper. Ricard lifted his glass, said, "Salut," and they drank. The proprietor closed his eyes for a moment and said, "Mon Dieu, that's good." He had a look at the label on the bottle and raised his eyebrows. "Oh, of course," he said. "Grapes from the same estate that bottles Chateau d'Yquem." "An old bottle," Ricard said. "Hidden from the Germans." The proprietor spat on his forge, producing a brief sizzle. "They come here with their French whores, as though they were on vacation." "And do they patrol the river here?" "Not really. As the Seine is the great river of Paris, the Loire is the great river of France.
The longest river in the country, but it can't be navigated. I mean, look at it."
They looked. A slow trickle of water, maybe 2 feet deep, worked its way past the gravel islands of the river. "Tell me, monsieur."
"Pascal."
Ricard and Desroches shook hands with him and introduced themselves.
"So then,"
Ricard continued, "all the barge traffic moves on the canals."
"That's how it's always been. Always. Everything moves on the canals, on barges. Wheat and rye, bricks, coal, much of what is produced in the region. Now it goes as far as Lyon, then by rail off to Germany."
"So the Germans patrol the canals?"
"They try. There's a patrol boat that comes by here on the canal, once in the early morning, then at dusk." "And the canals?"
Desroches said.
"How deep are they?" "It changes with the season, but around here, we say more than 8 feet.
Desroches and Ricard glanced at each other. That was deep enough for a shallow draft tugboat. Ricard refilled the glasses, and after Monsieur Pascal had taken a sip, he said,
"You know, I wasn't born yesterday. The kind of information you're seeking could get you in trouble if you asked the wrong person."
"I don't think you're the wrong person, Monsieur Pascal." Pascal smiled.
"I'm not. My friends and I don't like the Boche. There's nothing official, just a group of Frenchmen. But we keep an eye on what's what here, just in case. Someday somebody wants to know."
"Can you help us with a boat?"
"I would think so. By help? Do you mean engine repair? New sails? I can give you a good price on whatever you want. I live in the village of La Fontaine. Everyone knows us Pascals. We've worked the canals for generations. So what kind of boat do you need?"
"A small tugboat with a shallow draft," Ricard said. "Do you know the people who operate tugboats?"
"I know everybody. Tugboat captains included. Of course you need a particular kind of captain."
"Because what you propose sounds to me like a resistance operation." "You could call it that," Ricard said. Pascal thought for a moment.
"Some of the captains are political, some not. But I think your best man is known as Bastien, his surname. He's getting on in years, but he fought in the Great War, and he's very much a patriot, and he is fearless."
"And where would we find Bastien?"
"The tugboat captains and the river pilots, canal pilots, are to be found at Nantes, where the River Pilots Association has a small office, on the Quai de la Fosse."
Ricard thanked him for the information. Then Pascal said,
"What are you going to do with the tugboat?"
"We don't need it for long. A few days will do. So we mean to use it, do what we need to do, then get away." Pascal shook his head.
"What will you be carrying on the tugboat?"
"Certain German equipment. Better I don't say more than that."
"Well then, let's go and see your barge captain."
Pascal had the use of a car and drove Desroches and Ricard over to Nantes and the river pilot's office on the Quai de la Fosse. The association was housed in a single room in a creaky wooden building that hadn't yet fallen into the river, but it would get there. Inside it smelled of strong coffee and tobacco smoke. Bastien turned out to be in his late 70s, with a deeply seamed face and bright eyes with lines at the corners from squinting into the weather at sea. He wore a wool watch cap and smoked smelly little brown cigars. The three chatted for a time. Then Bastien said,
"What is it you want towed?"
"We're using it for transport, so it won't tow anything." Bastien stared at them. What was this? "We have a heavy load. The shape of, say, a torpedo."
"And you want me to take it up into the canal?"
"That's our plan."
"Crazy, my friends, truly crazy. But why not?"
The conversation continued for a while. Then it was time for Bastien to go to work. They said goodbye, and as Bastien left, he said,
Contact me when you're ready.
Desroches and Ricard returned their horses and found a train that, with a connection, would take them back to Paris. The provincial waterways departments had been digging barge canals since the 1700s, and as they moved north in the hot afternoon, the clatter of the train's wheels changed as they crossed the railway bridges. The people who worked the barges also lived on them. Sometimes a woman hanging out washing would wave at the train, and family dogs barked as it passed above them. In Paris, on the last day of August, Cacha visited Madame de la Boissière at her apartment. But just as Cacha arrived, a customer showed up. Then another. By late afternoon, the two decided to seek privacy at Cacha's room above the stockyards, where, after a glass of wine, Cacha stretched out over Madame de la B's knee, took down her panties and was smartly spanked. Not too hard, not too fast. Madame de la B was practiced and adept, and accompanied the event with a softly spoken narrative. The two were lying in Cacha's bed when the telephone rang, and Cacha, pink bottom wobbling as she crossed the room, answered it. At the other end of the line, Théodore, the spy who worked for the civil servants in London, sounded shaky. He suggested a meeting that night at a café in the 7th arrondissement. This was, to Cacha, an alarming telephone call. Contact with Théodore had always been clandestine, but this time he had simply called, openly. No chalk marks on lamp-posts, no oblique classified advertisements, no 12-year-old courier. Madame de la B, lying in bed with head propped on hand, the two rolls of her stomach sagging on the sheet, wondered about the call, but said nothing. Cacha had her mysteries. Madame de la B knew better than to intrude. The two shared a taxi, which dropped Madame de la B off at her apartment, then proceeded to the Rue Saint-Dominique. There sat Théodore, with coffee and newspaper, looking around every few seconds. Cacha didn't like it, told the driver to continue away down the street, got out, and found herself a vantage point in a doorway. She couldn't be sure, but sensed a trap. Many of the patrons seemed commonplace, but the pairs of large men in summer suits disturbed her. Then one of the men approached a nearby table, again a pair of men, then returned to his table. That was enough for Cacha. This was a trap. Théodore had been turned by the Gestapo and was being used as bait. Desroches and Ricard had hidden the stolen torpedo in a delivery van which they'd parked in a garage in Nantes. The owner of the garage didn't like it. He knew there was something dangerous in there, hidden beneath a canvas tarpaulin. He didn't think Ricard and Desroches were thieves. He thought they were résistants, and if their operation didn't work out, they would bring the Gestapo down on him. Yes, he was a patriot, but his patriotism only went so far. He planned to see the end of the war and to go back to living as he had before the Germans invaded. But he need not have worried. The following morning, Ricard and Desroches were back and drove the truck away in a cloud of grey exhaust smoke. The torpedo had to be moved to a rendezvous in the middle of France, and with all roads under German surveillance, it had to travel by tugboat, using the Loire canals. The tugboat carrying the torpedo left at dawn on the Loire Canal that wound its way to Orléans, then to the Rhône, the great river that flowed south to empty into the Mediterranean Sea near the city of Montpellier. Ricard sat against a bollard at the stern of the tugboat. As the sun rose, the leafy branches of oak and chestnut trees formed a canopy above the canal and threw shadows on the still green water. Around a bend, a flight of starlings took off from the trees and wove patterns in the sky, and now and then small V's of geese passed overhead. 2 hours from Nantes, the canal narrowed. Then a village appeared on both banks, and a fisherman waved to Ricard from an ancient bridge, perhaps a medieval bridge built of stone block with arches for boat passage along the waterway. Later, a barge carrying stacked lumber passed Ricard, likely headed for Nantes, a barge hauled by a pair of oxen who trudged along the towpath encouraged by a young girl with a long switch. It was quiet on the water. Only, from time to time, the sound of a passing train on the track that ran beside the river. Otherwise, there was just the thrum of the tugboat's engine. Just after midday, the tugboat reached the town of La Chebouette and docked at the town's single pier. Following instructions, Ricard found the local hotel and asked the clerk to buzz the room of one Monsieur Dubroc, no doubt an alias. 2 men came downstairs. Both were young and wore spectacles and tight beards. To Ricard, they looked like engineers. They all boarded the boat. Then Bastien got under way, but not for long. A mile from town they found a narrow channel. Water lilies floated on its surface, and its banks were overgrown with high reeds. Nobody'd been here for a long time. In the 1920s, there had been a brickyard at the end of the channel where bricks had been fabricated, then loaded onto barges and taken to construction sites along the river. The 2 men got to work right away. They measured the torpedo, took photographs, removed the detonator, and photographed that as well. "This torpedo's going to England," one of the men said. "But just in case something goes wrong on the way, we'll at least have information about it." As the tugboat reversed and chugged out of the brickyard, one of the engineers said, "Thank you for your work, Ricard. When the war is over, maybe you should get a medal, but I would be surprised if you did. Anyhow, goodbye. It's time for you to return home and forget this ever happened." Thus, on the 20th of September, Ricard found himself back in his garret. He stared out at the Rue de la Huchette, as he often did, at the Café La Régence, where local citizens and German occupation troops sat at tables on the terrasse, taking the sun on a fine September day. The investigator, his novel in progress, sat where he'd left it, by his Remington typewriter. He would, he thought, need another 2 months or so to finish it. Ricard hadn't noticed it at first, but now he saw a scrap of paper on the floor that had obviously been slipped under his door. "Please call me," the note said. It was signed K. Ricard telephoned. "It's Theodore," Kasia said. "He's been captured and turned by the Gestapo. If you meet with him, you stand a chance of being arrested." "How do you know he's been turned, Kasia?" "He told me. He said there was no way out for him and asked me to have him killed. There were tears in his eyes." "Killed?" "So he said." This was, Ricard knew, the way resistance networks operated. If one of their members became dangerous, and it didn't take much to persuade the leaders they were in danger, they were quick to eliminate the threat. Many people in France died that way in 1943. Some innocent, some guilty. "Are you willing to do such a thing?" Ricard said. "I suppose so, if I have to. Better that than the Rue des Saussayes." She meant the building used by the Gestapo to interrogate their prisoners. The screams could be heard on the street, and the Parisians found other ways to get where they were going. Conscious of his open telephone line, Ricard said, "Why don't you come over to my apartment so we can talk?" "When?" "Now." Half an hour later, Kasia appeared. She still wore her brown wool suit and tie-up Oxford shoes. "I'm not going to kill him. I'm not going to live with that memory," Ricard said. "What can you do?" "Get him out of this country. I have a lot of money, American dollars from my friends in London." "Can you talk to him, Kasia, safely? You can't go anywhere near him now." "I can telephone from a cafe." "Quickly, less than a minute, before the Germans figure out where the call is coming from." Kasia nodded. Later that morning, Ricard visited a travel agency in the 8th arrondissement. There were 4 desks at the agency, with German officers looking at brochures at 2 of them. "We are busy, as you see," the travel agent, a middle-aged woman, told him. "I've a friend who is thinking of taking a voyage," Ricard said. "Oh, yes? And where would the friend like to go?" "Argentina." "A long way from here."
"Yes, isn't it?"
"Your friend will need an exit visa, and then we'll have to find him space on a ship. South America is a popular destination just now, very popular."
"It must be the local colour, the,
Gauchos."
Yes, the gauchos. And lots of steaks to eat."
"When does your friend wish to travel?"
"As soon as possible."
"Well, as soon as you show up with the exit visa and his passport, we can write the ticket. Round trip?"
"One way." The travel agent nodded.
"It will be a long war,"
she said. Once again, Kasia and Ricard conferred in Ricard's apartment. "Anything new?" Ricard said.
"Not much. A while back I saw this very attractive woman on the metro, young, with a shag of blonde hair across her forehead. So yesterday I took the metro, and there she was again. This time I talked to her, and I suggested we have lunch together. She liked the idea. I said we could have supper in my little room, and she seemed to like that idea too. Anyhow, I'm not sure she knows what's going on, but we'll have an intimate conversation, and then we'll see."
"The thrill of the chase,"
Ricard said. "Nothing like it."
"What should we do about Theodore?"
"False papers. That's the only way. Passport, exit visa, and then a ticket to Argentina. Do you know somebody?"
"I do. I'll need the franked photograph from Theodore's passport."
"I'll telephone him from a cafe. He can leave his passport at the bookshop, and I'll pick it up when I go to work. I'll arrange to be elsewhere when he arrives. We'll have him leave it in a book."
"A Spanish dictionary," Ricard said. Kasia grinned and said,
"The very thing."
A late September afternoon. The sky sometimes grey, threatening rain, then blue and sunny with wind-blown clouds scudding over the city. Ricard left his garret, heading for the Jardin du Luxembourg. To keep him company in the park, he brought along his copy of Eric Ambler's A Coffin for Demetrios. The garden had a central avenue, which led to a pool where kids could sail toy boats. Then to either side was divided by shrubbery into small private rooms with benches. Ricard chose one of the rooms and opened his novel. He was at the point where Latimer, the university professor, is talking to Colonel Haki, the Turkish detective in Istanbul. Ricard read with great pleasure. This was his 3rd time through the book. He knew what came next, and he looked forward to it. There were, he thought, good vitamins in this book, nourishing to a writer of spy fiction. A man appeared at the entry to the shrubbery room and said, "Are you Ricard, the writer? May I join you?" Ricard moved over on the bench, and the man sat down. He was in his 40s, maybe a matinee idol type when younger, but now his hair was thinning, and worry lines marked his face. He was, Ricard thought, aging quickly. He wore a shaggy moustache, black with grey strands, and had on sunglasses. "You like your book?" he said. Ricard nodded. "Your favourite Ambler?" "I think so. Everything is right, Istanbul and the Demetrios character, and his history in the Levant. Better than the Dark Frontier," the man said. Then he said, "I should tell you I'm called Adrian." "You're English." "I'm a little bit of everything. Adrian was somebody else's idea, but it will do for the moment." Well, he wasn't, by his accent, French, Ricard thought. He didn't sing the language the way the French did, enjoying every word. Yet his French was perfect, the language of a foreigner who was used to it and likely worked in it. So who was he?
Are you surprised I know who you are? Adrian said. Well, there are photographs on my dust jackets. I've read them all, by way of getting to know you. They're good, Monsieur Ricard. The Waterfront Spy, the Odessa Affair, all of them. And you have something in common with Ambler. Your hero is not a detective, not a government agent. Like Ambler's Latimer, he's caught up in the politics of his time. One is sympathetic to Latimer, a rather stodgy college professor thrown into the middle of a secret operation because he writes romans policiers, his way of escaping academic publication. That's what makes the Ambler novels so good. I grew tired of policeman heroes, Simenon's Maigret and Hercule Poirot, Agatha Christie's detective. I prefer the amateurs like Latimer. And like you, Monsieur Ricard. Ricard knew this contact with a stranger was no accident, and waited for the man called Adrian to reveal the reason for it. Adrian leaned forward a little and said, According to my friend Layla, and to the people in London she works for, you did well in Paris, and in Saint-Nazaire. Like Ambler's heroes, you're a committed anti-fascist. I always was, all through the 30s, and now with the occupation even more so. And prepared to work? Ricard hesitated. He had only just gone back to living his usual life and took pleasure in it. But he understood that refusing Adrian's offer wasn't really possible. When a war comes to your country, you have to join up. What was Trotsky's quote? You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Finally, Ricard said, What do you want me to do? This park feels a little too public. Is there somewhere we can go? Maybe a restaurant? There's a restaurant I like, up on the Rue de Richelieu. It's too far to walk, we'll have to take a taxi. Ricard said, Let's do that. Tell me about the restaurant. It's called Maurice. On the street floor they have the usual ration coupon dishes, turnips, cabbage, animal feed. But they have a black market restaurant on the first floor. A good one? Adrian asked. It is, and expensive. And do they serve steak frites? Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. They're known for it. Ricard said. Then let's go and eat there. Is the steak au poivre? Ricard nodded. It's been a long time since I had a real steak frite. I think about it, Adrian said. Ricard claimed he could tell whether a restaurant was good or not by the smell that reached you as you stepped inside the front door. Up on the first floor, the Restaurant Maurice smelled very good indeed. Ricard and Adrian settled at a table by the window, then peered at the day's menu chalked on a blackboard. For a moment, Ricard considered the poulet rôti or the quenelles of pike, then ordered the steak frite. As they waited for their orders to arrive, Adrian said, Do you know the word exfiltration? It's a word used mostly by people in the special services. Yes, I know the word, Ricard said. It means helping someone escape from a hostile area. That's what we want you to do. There are fugitives hiding out all over France, our own agents, French agents, and the Poles. Hundreds of agents, all of them used to convey information that can be used to defeat the Reich. We use wireless telegraph sets to transmit some of this information, but much of it travels by hand, down established escape lines until it reaches Spain, and in time finds its way to London. These escape lines send the courier from safe house to safe house, all run by people who don't like the Germans or the Vichy administration. One of our jobs back here is to keep our couriers safe. What we want you to do is travel down one of these escape lines. It has a code name, Shepherd, assigned by the people in London. This line, like many others, goes from Paris down to Perpignan, then to Spain, in time to the British naval base at Gibraltar. You'll make contact with our agents in Spain, and they'll escort you to the base. Their soup arrived at the table, a potage de légumes, warm and thick, coloured a rich brown by the lentils used to make it. Ricard ate a spoonful and recalled how the French believed in soup. With bread and wine, it was all one really needed. And why the shepherd line? Ricard said. We need to be certain that it isn't penetrated by the Boche. And you're not certain now. We're not, but then we are professionally suspicious. One of the women that ran a safe house for Shepherd has disappeared. Now we have reason to believe she was having a love affair, was caught by her husband, then ran away with her lover. They fled. We don't know where, but we don't believe that the Gestapo snatched her and made up the story. We believe, but we don't know, so it needs to be investigated. Adrian had some more of his soup, then said, We have a car for you, a Citroën Berline 11, the 1938 model, adapted with a coal-burning engine when the petrol was sent to Germany. You have official permission to drive it because you are supposedly a veterinary surgeon. We'll give you the papers. I haven't done much driving, Ricard said. I'm a city boy, but I know how to drive. All right, better if you don't drive. The Boche run snap checks on cars, in the city and in the countryside. We'd prefer that you take the trains, especially the night trains, because the Germans don't like to work at night, so controls on those trains are very rare. So much for German efficiency, Ricard said. That's something of a myth. The Germans like to think of themselves as efficient, but they aren't really. Thank God. Now, the normal procedure for a new operative is to send him to Scotland, where we have a training base, but in your case we don't have the time. We need an investigator right away to make sure of the safe houses and the people who have the responsibility of running them. The waiter took the soup plates away, then brought the steak frites, the potatoes gold and crisp, still sizzling from the fryer, and intensely aromatic. On the side, a dish of béarnaise sauce for both steak and frites. The dinner stopped conversation for a time. Both Adrian and Ricard had been living on wartime diets, and they were hungry. After the main plat, a green salad, then a fresh pear. Ricard and Adrian both lit cigarettes as coffees arrived. Find yourself a safe house, Adrian said. You can't do this work from your apartment. A house with a chimney to hold the wire for the wireless telegraph set. A chimney not visible from the street. I'll find something, Ricard said. How much rent should I pay for it? Whatever it costs, Adrian said. Speaking of which, he passed Ricard a fat envelope beneath the table. Ricard looked inside and saw American bills in $50 denominations. It's $5,000. Convert some of it into occupation francs for train fares and room rentals, but keep the dollars for bribes. Anyhow, use it as you like and don't scrimp. There's plenty more where that came from. Still, Ricard said, a lot of money. It isn't really, because the way we fight these days is with money. That's our weapon. So, a safe house. Where to look? Years earlier, after leaving his room near the Sorbonne, Ricard had looked for a new place to live. In time, he found his garret by chatting with street market vendors in the quartier, because these women, toughened and weathered by years of selling vegetables in all seasons, knew everything that went on. "See Madame Cabert," he'd been told, and he had tracked her down at her vegetable stand. She had a friend who owned a building on the Rue de la Hachette, and Ricard, searching for an apartment, soon had a garret. "For an artist or a poet, it's just right," Madame Cabert said. Of course, Paris had changed in 1940, and there was now a surplus of apartments for rent. Some had belonged to Jews who'd been rounded up by the police. Some had belonged to foreigners, mostly American or British, who'd once upon a time, with money to spare, thought an apartment in Paris was a fine trophy. The war had chased them back home, and now the 4 rent pages of the newspapers had columns of available apartments and available houses.
End of Disc 4. Disc 5.
Ricard began by considering the city, arrondissement by arrondissement. The streets around his own neighborhood, the 5th and the 6th, were full of uniformed Germans who had replaced the Americans and the British in colonizing the left bank, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, student and bohemian Paris. The 7th remained a bastion of the old rich families who had lived there for generations. Ricard wanted a neighborhood where strangers weren't so much the subjects of speculation and gossip. There were numerous vacant apartments in the Marais, but those had once been Jewish apartments, and the area now felt desolate and abandoned. To Ricard, the 16th and 17th were occupied by the well-to-do who cared too much about someone moving in next door. Perhaps the 4th, Ricard thought, which was technically part of the Marais but was just across the Seine from the 5th, and until he reached the 11th had the same character. He walked there. It wasn't far from his own street, taking the Pont Marie, then headed for the Place des Vosges, where he found fancy shops and an inviting café, the Bistro Ma Bourgogne, which occupied one corner of the park. Here he stopped to have a coffee and a look at the local population. This was an attractive part of Paris, but there were few Germans about. Maybe it wasn't in their guidebooks. The bistro patrons looked shabby and poor, but that was due to the occupation. Ricard knew the bonne bourgeoisie when he saw it. This was the proper country for the writer Ricard. He felt at home here. But this was not the proper place for the secret agent Ricard. He wanted, in that role, anonymity. And it wasn't there at Ma Bourgogne. He could have comfortably struck up a conversation with any of the people at the tables on the terrasse. Ricard was tempted by the 10th, where the 2 railway stations, the Gare de l'Est and the Gare du Nord, were located. But if agents travelling on any of the escape lines were going to be hidden there, they would be surrounded by German travellers in great numbers, going on or returning from leave in Germany. So, Ricard thought, the 10th won't work. What he would need was a railway station from which trains headed south, towards Perpignan, then Spain, for agents trying to get out of the country. This meant the Gare de Lyon, in the 12th arrondissement. Ricard took the métro to the Gare de Lyon stop and walked up the stairs. Coming out of the station, he saw the span of railway tracks that emerged from a tunnel, heading for the La Chapelle freight yards, the rails glinting silver in the sunlight. Staring at them, Ricard wanted to be on a train going far away from claustrophobic, occupied Paris. How he'd loved his city before the war. Now it was a prison. Well, tant pis, he thought. Too bad. Walking north from the station on the Rue de Bercy, he was close to the Seine, could see barges being worked up the river. Here he came upon the Rue Crémieux, a sullen street with a couple of cheap hotels. In the middle of the block he found a narrow, 2 rooms wide building, plastered in darkening tan stucco, with a small boulangerie on the ground floor that had a for rent sign in the window. He entered the shop, bought a demi-baguette, asked about the building, and was told to see the notary at his office on the next block, one Monsieur Luc, who turned out to be a talkative gent with white hair. Monsieur Luc paged through a dossier and said, "It's been vacant for a long time." "That's a good place for me," Ricard said. "I'll take it." After hesitating, Monsieur Luc said, "Monsieur, you don't—" He didn't finish, but Ricard knew where he was going. Ricard didn't look like the sort of person who would live in such a place. "I need a building to store equipment," he said, then paid 2 months' rent in occupation francs, signed a 1-year lease, and Monsieur Luc gave him the key. Ricard returned to the building, and after a struggle with the lock, went inside. The interior was empty of furniture, and smelled of dust and mould. A narrow wooden staircase led up to the first floor, one room right, one left. The floorboards were warped, now bare wood and grey with age, and the walls, painted white a long time ago, were stained. On the top floor, a chimney rose through the roof. At the base of the chimney was an opening with a square black stain on the floor, where a small stove had stood. Looking out of the window, Ricard saw that he was above a courtyard with some kind of workshop, 1 story high, opposite the window. Ricard cranked the window open and smelled fresh varnish. Perhaps they made furniture in the shop. Closing the window, he thought about actually living in the building. A safe house had to have a guardian. Someone would have to live there, to take care of agents on the move or fugitives on the run, find food for them. They would need ration cards, but these were easily forged, and have a bed for them to sleep in. Looking at the chimney, Ricard thought that a WT wire could be run up the inside, as long as a heater wasn't being used. It was now late October. People were walking around barely heated apartments in their overcoats. Perhaps, he thought, he could find some thick blankets. Heading back towards the métro, Ricard chewed the end off his demi-baguette. It was dreadful, the same consistency as cotton, baked with occupation flour. He threw the remainder of the bread into the street, where it was set upon by the local pigeons. 10th of October, the Gare de Lyon. Ricard began his journey down the Shepherd escape line by taking the night train to Troyes, some 110 miles southeast of Paris. At the station, the waiting room was half full and barely lit, so that some of the travellers faded into the shadows. The train was late, according to the Roman numeral clock on the wall. This was confirmed by the appearance of a ticket clerk, who used a rag to erase 23:30. The railways ran on 24-hour time, military time, and then chalked in 00:30. The trip down to Troyes would take 2 hours or so. Ricard would be there at 2 in the morning. Ricard looked around the room. Were there British agents on the move in here? German operatives hunting them? 2 gendarmes, army uniforms and red kepi, flat-topped hats with horizontal brims, entered the room and moved among the benches asking to see papers. Not for all the travellers, only some of them. They stopped and stood over Ricard, one of them saying, "Your papers, monsieur." Ricard did as he asked, and the gendarme held up a typed list and compared Ricard's name to the ones on his paper. He took his time, was careful, and in no hurry, and Ricard grew tense as the gendarme searched. What had Théodore told the Gestapo before Ricard had him sent off to Argentina? His name? Likely not. If Théodore had done that, Ricard would have been arrested. Or did they decide to wait, to follow him and see who he met and what he did? The Gestapo certainly operated in that way. The gendarme handed Ricard back his passport and exit visa, then took a long look at him. "Your name isn't on this list, but I'm sure we both know it's on some list." It was almost midnight when Ricard heard the train pulling slowly into the station, and he walked out on the platform. When the train hissed to a stop, Ricard saw that it was wet, water running down the sides of the cars. It had apparently come through a rainstorm on its way to Paris. At one end of the platform, a large group of Wehrmacht troopers were waiting at the first carriage. As with the métro, German soldiers had their own private carriage. Where? Ricard wondered. Were they going? They were in full combat dress, with heavy packs on their backs and rifles slung on their shoulders. As Ricard watched, They smoked nervously and talked among themselves in low voices. Wherever it was, they clearly weren't happy to be going there. Maybe Russia, with not much chance of ever returning home. Or maybe it was North Africa to fight against British forces, scheduled to invade Italy once the North African coast was secured. The war was changing, Ricard thought. The Allies were eventually, who knew when, going to win. It was dark on the train. Ricard found a seat in a first-class compartment. The Germans were very conscious of class distinctions and rarely checked the first-class passengers. When a woman with a child looked through the glass partition, Ricard rose and gave up his seat and stood in the aisle, his canvas satchel between his feet. As the train was about to leave, an older woman, grey-haired, well-dressed, stood next to him. "Do you always ride the night trains?" she said. "Now and then," Ricard said, "when there's no other way." "Are you getting off at Troyes?" "I am." "Nice little town, Troyes. Centre of trade routes, long ago. You have family there?" "No. Going to see a friend." From the woman, a knowing smile. "Always good to see a friend. Love makes the world go round." "That's true," Ricard said. Was this woman just an old busybody, or was there more to it? "You'll have to take a taxi at the station, unless you're being met." "Well, I'm not being met." "Perhaps we can share a taxi." "Where does your friend live, in Troyes?" "I have the address in my bag. I don't remember it." "You don't?" "No, I don't." "You could get it out. That way we might share a taxi." "Maybe later," Ricard said. This woman was more than a busybody. Someone had sent her to talk to him and find out what he was doing. His heart sank. Was there no end to this? He wanted to help Adrian, and he'd been lucky so far, but the enemy was relentless. After he eluded this woman, he would be approached again. At the Troyes station, there were 2 taxis waiting. Ricard took the first and asked the driver to go to the commercial hotel he'd been told to use. The driver was a young man, likely the son of the man who owned the taxi and drove it most of the time. After going a few blocks, he said, "That other taxi's following us, monsieur. Someone you know?" "Someone I don't want to know." "Ah, yes, that occurred to me. Shall I lose him?" "Please," Ricard said. "That will cost extra. We'll burn up more fuel." "I'll be happy to pay." The driver sped up as much as he could. The coal-driven cars could go no faster than 45 miles an hour. So the driver made up for it by taking Ricard and whoever was following him into the old, medieval section of the city, near the cathedral. In a labyrinth of narrow streets, the driver turned left, then right, folding his outside view mirror flat against the window and taking an alley that seemed too narrow for a car. In time, no headlights behind them, they arrived at the hotel. The chase left Ricard overexcited and tense, and once in his room at the hotel he couldn't sleep. Music had always calmed him, so he turned the radio on and found a woman vocalist fronting a swing band. "Gonna take a sentimental journey, gonna set my heart at ease." This worked, and soon enough Ricard drifted into a dreamless sleep. In the morning, Ricard found a café and telephoned the safe house, a doctor's office. This was an extremely important rule. Always telephone a safe house before going there, and use the coded protocol. "Hello? Is Michel there?" "You mean Roland?" the doctor said. "Yes, Roland. Can you see a patient this morning?" "I believe I can." If he'd said, "You'll have to wait, I have many patients this morning," it meant that the Germans were there. According to Adrian, doctors' offices were much favoured sites for the civil servants in London. A doctor's office received calls from many different numbers. Messages could be left for other agents, and whoever was bugging the line would not be able to determine which calls had to do with escape lines, as long as the caller was faithful to the use of opaque language. Ricard took a taxi there and met with the doctor, a greying man in a white coat with a stethoscope hanging around his neck. He showed Ricard to an unused examination room, where a young couple was spending the night. The room was empty. The couple, according to the doctor, had hidden in a closet when they'd heard the tap on the door. Back in his office, the doctor said, "They are following the rules." In a safe house, agents were never seen. They had to wait, silent and out of sight, until they were sent on to the next safe house on the escape line. When they'd returned to the office, the doctor said, "It's hard on them, having to follow the rules. They're fighting the war. They want their hands on guns and explosives, but once on the escape line, their worst enemy is boredom." "Is there anything you need?" Ricard said, "It would be nice to have some books. Reading makes the time pass." "Don't you have a bookshop in Troyes?" "We do, or rather we did. The people who own it now are faithful to Vichy, or worse, and they have filled their shelves with fascist tracts and propaganda." "What would you like?" Ricard asked. "Escapist literature, historical novels and detective stories, novels about life at sea or the Napoleonic Wars, or fantasies. I had a good collection of Saint-Exupéry, Night Flight and The Little Prince and others. But they fell apart. Too much reading." "I'll see what I can do," Ricard said. The next stop on the Shepherd escape line was at a beauty shop, the Salon Lolotte, on the Rue Candolle, in the town of Orléans. After the telephone protocol, Ricard went to see the safe house, a spare room above the salon. Entering the salon, Ricard found a row of women sitting patiently beneath chrome hairdryers, the whir of their fans loud in the small shop. Ricard found Lolotte at work, cutting a woman's hair. She was, Ricard thought, properly named. Lolotte, a nickname for a merry and fun-loving woman. Lolotte herself had carrot-coloured hair, was fat and blousy, red-faced and coarse. Ricard had identified himself by the protocol and asked to see the spare room. He waited while she finished her haircut, then was taken up to the spare room, where two agents were having lunch. Back in the shop, Lolotte said, "Well, they keep coming." "Yes, we're grateful for your help." "You people could be a little more grateful, you know." "Oh, yes? What do you mean?" "I mean money. That's what grateful means, mon ami." "Did they offer to pay you when you started out?" "Not a sou. I'm supposed to do this to help fight the Germans, but food for your agents or whatever they are isn't free. And I'm putting myself in danger. That's worth something." "I'll try to help you, Lolotte," Ricard said. "I have some money with me and I'll bring it over later today." It wasn't so unusual to help the guardians of safe houses, but Ricard had the feeling he was being blackmailed. Still, he wasn't going to argue with her. "Don't forget," she said, sulky and demanding. "All I have to do is drop a word in someone's ear and poof, there goes your safe house. And whoever happens to be staying here. I've seen some rough types, you can believe that." "I know," Ricard said. "Some of our agents are former soldiers." "One of them had his eye on me, meant to have my pussy. He wasn't so bad looking, and my husband died years ago, the little bastard. So I figured here's my new beau, but then he settled on Petite Suzette. Mignonne. Cute. That one, with her sweet little nose and pointy tits. One of my hairdressers. She saw this rough type and looked at him that way and began wagging her little behind. So much for Lolotte." "What happened to her?" Lolotte laughed, more like a snicker than a laugh. "Her? She's long gone, Petite Suzette. Well, I had to say something, didn't I? She was the one who ran the safe house. And when your people didn't hear from her, they sent somebody to see what was going on, and that's what I told him.
Madame Lolotte, what really happened here?
Someone, I can't imagine who, betrayed her. And the Gestapo sent one of their cars around, but she ran out the back door and I never saw her again. The Gestapo questioned me, but I didn't tell them anything. It took a long time, a real grilling, but in the end I persuaded them that Petite Suzette was in it by herself. I expect they're still looking for her.
What did you tell them about Suzette?
Only that she said she was going to shoot a German. I didn't dare to tell them about the room or the agents. Then they would have taken me away.
True to his word, Ricard brought 1,000 occupation francs to the shop later that day. Lolotte was mollified.
Now that's the way to do business, she said.
Ricard resumed his inspection tour, to a cobbler in Bourges, then to a mansion where the safe house was run by an 80-year-old couple in Limoges. Next he visited a farm run by 2 widowed sisters, husbands gone in the 1914 war, outside Périgueux, then to a small épicerie, grocery store in a village near Agen, to a draper in Toulouse, finally to a bookshop in Perpignan, where the Pyrenees mountain border of Spain was visible from the railway station. With one exception, Ricard thought, these were good and honourable people. They ran escape lines and kept safe houses because they hated the Boche. And they knew what would happen to them if the Gestapo discovered what they were doing, yet they persisted in the face of danger. The Gestapo could be stupid, but they could also be cunning. They set traps for the agents that spied, stole secrets, cut telephone lines, and assassinated German officers. In one case, the Gestapo set up their own escape line north of Paris and arrested agents who thought they were heading to Spain. As planned, Ricard was scheduled to meet with Adrien at the bookshop in Perpignan. This was owned by a gentle couple in middle age, the man with a white beard, who were virtual godparents to young students, struggling writers, communists, intellectuals, whoever needed the consolation of books. They had a carpenter friend, a veteran of the army, and he built them a clever bookcase, which slid aside to reveal a second bookcase. In the first, they stocked the shelves with children's books, lives of the saints, and lengthy tomes that offered the reader ancient history, theology, and science. In the hidden bookcase, one would find the forbidden fruit: Steinbeck, Hemingway, Gide, Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, François Villon, and Karl Marx. All of these deemed enemies of fascism, their books among those burned by the Nazis in 1933. Officers from the Propagandastaffel had visited the shop, found the couple mildly dotty but not dangerous. The carpenter who'd built the secret bookcase had also designed a secret door, hidden by panels in what had once been a wine cellar, and was now a safe house. The couple brought Ricard down there, said, "Your friend is waiting for you," pressed one of the panels. And there was Adrien. The couple left them to talk and went back upstairs. "Well," Adrien said, "now you've seen the Shepherd line." "I've seen it, one end to the other. It took me 10 days. And that's only one of many. There are dozens of others all over France." "I had no idea," Ricard said. "Well, it's what the British can do right now. Send agents to organize resistance, bring coastal raiding parties in by submarine and bomb the Reich. Set Europe ablaze, as Churchill puts it. Did you find anything amiss?" "There is a problem, I think. In Orléans, I had to bribe a woman known as Lolotte, who owns the beauty salon. She threatened to betray the woman who ran the safe house." Adrien was silent for a moment, then said, "Explicitly?" "Yes, I gave her money, so she's content." "For the moment," Adrien said. "Yes, for the moment.
Well, people like that don't stop. Once they realize they can blackmail somebody, they come back for more. I believe she will. That's who she is. The line runs through Orléans. We can't change that. And the woman? She is my responsibility, Adrian said. I have to consider her a real threat. Ricard nodded and lit a cigarette. I imagine you're tired, Adrian said. Ricard shrugged. That doesn't matter. I want you to check the border crossing. Then you can get back on the trains and go home. The following morning, Ricard left Perpignan and took a very slow 2-carriage local up into the mountains to the village of La Tour de Carol, north of the town of Bourg-Madame. At the edge of the village, he found a park that lay a few hundred yards from the actual frontier. There was no border station. Nobody was entirely sure where the border actually was, and neither the French nor the Spanish residents really cared. Here, on Sunday afternoons, local people from both countries mingled for a few hours, until it was time to go home for dinner. Agents coming down the shepherd line joined the residents, met Spanish couriers, and simply walked into Spain. By the time Ricard got on the train to make his way eventually back to Paris, he was cold. It was autumn, and tired, spent. The journey down the escape line had exhausted him, though he hadn't realized it at the time. Too many nights on trains, too many people to size up, too much anxiety about being watched or followed, too much shadowy danger in the world of escape lines and safe houses. Heading back to Paris, he broke the rules and took sleeping compartments on express trains. Adrian had given him money. He used it. And slept well. Beyond well, a dead sleep interrupted only by stops at railway stations. This is the cure for insomnia, he thought. The steady beat of train wheels on rails knocked him close to unconscious. At last, Paris, his garret, and, lying on his bed, he exhaled, as though for the first time in days. Meanwhile, Adrian had made arrangements to solve the difficulty with Lolotte. The Prestige Taxi Company was located in a garage in an industrial suburb of Orléans. 2 men, known as Gilles and Henri, met there on the afternoon of the 14th of November. Gilles was tall, had thinning black hair and a permanent 5 o'clock shadow which made him look evil. Which he was. Henri was chubby and pink, baby-faced, and had grown a moustache which made him look like a baby with a moustache. Before the war, Gilles had worked as a merchant seaman, Henri as a clerk in a government office. Then, with the fall of France in 1940, both men had fled to London to join de Gaulle, and had then been recruited by the British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, for clandestine work in France. They had met before. Now they were in Orléans to do a job for the civil servants. "Are you the driver?" Henri said. "Or is it me?" "You drive," Gilles said. "I'll be the passenger." They then bribed the dispatcher, who found them a dependable taxi and made sure there was enough coal in the bins beneath the taxi's wheel wells. They drove out of the garage and found Rue Candolle and the Salon Lolotte. Then they circled the block and parked 100 feet from the beauty shop. And waited. Henri drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Gilles smoked a Balto cigarette. A few minutes after 7 in the evening, Lolotte emerged from her salon, locked the door, and headed down the street. She wore a bright green coat and a matching hat with a feather, setting off her carrot-coloured hair. "There she is," Henri said. Gilles climbed out of the back seat and caught up with Lolotte. He put an arm around her shoulders and said, "Lolotte, it's Gilles. Do you remember me?" Lolotte, startled, said, "Who? I'm not sure I—" those were her last words. Because Jules reached around and, revolver in hand, shot her in the heart. Then, to make sure, shot her again in the left temple. That was the end of Lolotte, and the Orléans safe house was once again safe. Solitaire. Kasia called Ricard. "I've met someone," she said. "I'm going to a club tonight. Why don't you meet me there? I'll buy you a drink and tell you all." "Which club?" "It's called Le Coup de Foudre. It means the lightning bolt. Love at first sight." Ricard arrived at 7 and found the club in a cellar, somewhere out in the wilds of the 9th arrondissement. When Ricard came in the door, all eyes were on him. Who is this, in our private playground? A few men there, but mostly women, all ages, wearing black, 2 or 3 of them smoking cigarettes in ivory holders. It reminded him of Berlin in the 20s. Kasia showed up right away, wearing her worker's cap, lace-up boots outfit. Before she sat down, she kissed Ricard on both cheeks. Then she ordered brandies, quickly drank the first one, and dawdled with the second. "You seem to be in a good mood," he said. "I had dinner with the bunny rabbit last night." Ricard was perplexed. "The girl with the blonde shag across her forehead," she explained. "I told you about her. I saw her on the metro and invited her to supper in my room, and she showed up. I worried about that, but there she was, in a dress that showed everything and sexy shoes. I cooked us a dinner on my hot plate, an omelette. That's about what I can do, bread and a bottle of wine. With an assignation, you know, you don't want a heavy meal beforehand. Afterwards, that's the time to eat. Then we sat on my bed. There's nowhere else to sit. And I began to rub her back. She was telling me her life story as one does. Went to such and such lycée, up in the 16th where she grew up. Papa was in the chemical business. Obviously they were rich. But she wasn't ready to get married and all of that. Traveled for a time, before the war, you know, Rome and Venice, Capri, the usual. Then she lived at home until she had to do something. So she got a job teaching at her old lycée, then moved to one closer to the center of the city where she had to take the métro. And there I happened to see her, and I liked her right away, so I took that métro a few times, and lo and behold, there she was, and I invited her to dinner. Still rubbing her back, I kissed her. She was reluctant at first, then she began to like it, and kissed back. Took a little more time, but I got her dress off. What is it about rich girls' bodies? Is it all the tennis they play, ballet lessons? Anyhow, she was ravishing. Finally I stripped her. Little hesitations on the way, of course, but off it all came. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and gave me a very shy, very timid smile. So, I thought, first time with a woman for the bunny rabbit. I stood in front of her and took off all my clothes. And her eyes never left me. She was rapt. Then came the serious part. Kissing on the mouth leads to kissing on the breasts, you know, then down from there. Leisurely at first, you know. I know, Kasia. God, the Ricard! She was so loud when she came. The whole building must have heard her. What a girl, Ricard! I think I'm in love. I'm glad for you, mon ami, Ricard said. He offered Kasia a cigarette, took one for himself, then lit both and said, Does she have a name? Denise, Kasia said, lingering on the name, in love with the sound of it. She makes you happy, that's obvious. That isn't the word for what she makes me. So you'll see her again? Kasia nodded with a knowing smile. We're going to meet at a hotel tomorrow night. It's the Grand Hotel, by the Opéra. Fancy, Ricard said. And the restaurant's a good one. Kasia said, What will I wear? You'll find something. Oh, I will. I'll go to Madame de la Boissière. A thin woman in black approached the table and said to Kasia, The band is just starting up. Care to dance? Then she turned to Ricard and said, You don't mind, do you? Ricard gave Kasia a complicit look and said, I was just leaving. Room 406, the Grand Hôtel. Kasia had spent some money at Madame de la Boissière's private boutique and wore a cream-coloured silk blouse with the top 2 buttons open and wide-legged wool trousers. It was a thin shirt. Kasia wore no bra, and her small breasts were evident beneath the silk fabric. Denise answered her knock immediately, wearing a heavy, bitter-sweet fragrance and a diaphanous nightdress that fell just barely to the tops of her thighs. Kasia kissed her on both cheeks, then on the lips. You look wonderful, Bunny Rabbit, she said. Denise turned in a circle for her and said, Pretty, no? I had a bottle of wine sent up. May I pour you a glass? Kasia nodded. Denise poured a glass of red wine for each of them, then raised her glass and said, To our time together. Kasia had a sip. The wine was much better than anything she was used to. She walked to the window and, looking down, saw a crowd entering the opera house, some of the women with German officer escorts. A poster by the opera door said, Tonight, Offenbach, La Belle Hélène. There was more, but the print was too small for Kasia to read from a distance. Denise had come up behind her and put her arm around Kasia's shoulders. Kasia covered Denise's hand with her own and said, Ma biche, my darling. You're sweet, Denise said. The wine had been served with a basket of buttered little toasts. Kasia had one, then another, then a third. Merde, she said. They know how to make toast here. Le grand, Denise said. The best of everything. Denise sat on the edge of the bed and patted the space beside her, and as Kasia sat down, turned off the lamp on the bedside table. That must have been a signal, because the door opened, and 2 men entered, both holding automatic pistols. The leader had fair hair, was a short man and not happy about it, stood with his chest thrust out and chin held high, and had a fat, sullen face, an angry face. I am called Voshki. Kasia, put your hands behind your back. As he started to tie her wrists with twine, he said, And that's Simon. Simon was thin and placid-looking, with silver-rimmed spectacles. There was, Kasia thought, something very wrong with him, as though he lived in another world, his eyes unfocused, a slack smile on his lips. Voshki looked around the room and found Kasia's pea jacket, draping it across her shoulders so that her bound wrists could not be seen. Now, let's go downstairs and walk through the lobby. Don't cry out, or I will give you the beating of your life. What are you going to do with me? Kasia said. Take you to another hotel, where you will be under guard. Kasia tried to figure out who Voshki was. Where did he come from? But she couldn't. He'd floated up to the surface from the seamy underside of Europe and made his way to Paris. One more predator in the City of Light. Simon was apparently French. At least his name was pronounced in the French fashion. Still sitting on the edge of the bed, the bunny rabbit was crying silently with 2 tears rolling down her cheeks. Forgive me, Kasia, she said. I was forced to betray you. Kasia stared at her and said nothing. She'd been led by desire to capture and was too angry to speak. As Kasia walked through the lobby, well-dressed Parisians were all around her, cigarettes in hand, smiling, laughing, posing, making brilliant conversation. They likely noticed Kasia and her keepers, but decided not to notice them. They were simply an oddity that required a glance and a look away. One of the German officers stared briefly, but he was going to the opera, and these people, whoever they might be, were beneath him. There was a car waiting in front of the hotel, a Peugeot that ran on petrol, not on coal. Which means, Kasia thought, that this Voschki creature is important. The two men laid Kasia face down on the back seat. Then Voschki drove the car, and Simon sat beside him. "The twine is too tight," Kasia said, thinking she might get away as Simon tried to re-tie her. "It's not for long," Voschki said. For some 20 minutes, Voschki drove quickly through the thin traffic, then stopped. The two men helped Kasia from the car, pea jacket draped over her shoulders. Kasia saw that the hotel was called Le Brillant, a common second-class commercial hotel. Inside at the desk stood an unsmiling blonde woman in SS uniform. She looked like one of those female athletes in shorts and sleeveless tops one saw in German newsreels, exercising with a heavy medicine ball. Voschki greeted her in German, and she responded briefly. As Kasia was taken upstairs, she realized that the Germans had taken over this hotel for their own personal use. This puzzled her. Why had they not taken her to some Gestapo office? If not the Gestapo, then who had kidnapped her? At the beginning of the occupation, Voschki had gone into business, kidnapping people who were résistants and selling them to the German security services. At 9 in the morning, Voschki drove to the Avenue Kléber and rolled to a stop in front of the Hôtel Majestic, an occupation command center. On the 4th floor of the hotel, he found the office of his business associate, SS Sturmbannführer, Major Erhard Geisler. Geisler was a pear-shaped man who wore clear-frame plastic spectacles, his exterior bland and placid. He was no street thug, rather a man who signed papers ordering arrests, transport to concentration camps, or immediate execution. Voschki stood in front of Geisler's desk, gave the stiff-armed salute and said, "Heil Hitler." Geisler responded but did not invite Voschki to sit down. "Herr Voschki," the major said, "what have you got for me?" "A young woman, Polish, I believe, called Kasia." Gerhard took from a drawer a thick sheaf of typewritten pages, his list of Paris residents who were suspected of resistance activity. After finding Kasia's name, he studied the paragraph next to it, then said, "Where is she?" "In a room at the Hôtel Brillant." "She's not someone I would buy, not as a single unit." "Then she works with a partner, a writer called Paul Ricard. He was known to the English spy Theodore. We'll buy both of them if you can find Ricard." Voschki wanted to argue but thought better of it. "I will try, Major," he said. "Then that will be all," Geisler said. Back at the Brillant, Voschki went to the room where Kasia was being held, seated in a chair with her hands tied behind her. Voschki took Simon aside, described his meeting with Geisler, and said, "We will turn this into an opportunity. I'm going to telephone Ricard." He went down to the reception desk and found Ricard's number in a city telephone directory. When the phone rang in Ricard's garret, he was hard at work on The Investigator, a scene where Valois, the arson investigator, confronts the owner of the Romanian factory. Annoyed at the interruption, he almost didn't answer. Then did. "Hello? Monsieur Ricard?" "Yes.
I am known as Vojki. I specialize in the capture of fugitives of interest to the Occupation Authority. And I am calling to tell you that we have taken your friend Kasia and are holding her for ransom. Otherwise, she goes to the Gestapo.
Ricard had to catch his breath, then said, "Ransom? How much do you want?"
We feel your friend is worth 5,000 American dollars. Are you disposed to help her, or shall I telephone the Gestapo?
Kasia was no fugitive, Ricard thought, unless the Gestapo decided she was. But he wasn't going to argue with this Vojki person. "Very well," Ricard said. "I'll pay the ransom, but it will take a day or so for me to collect that much money."
Today is the 10th of November,
Vojki said.
Shall we say the 15th?
All right, where do I find you?
Stay home on the morning of the 15th and you'll receive a telephone call. We'll tell you then where to go.
I'll have to see her, Ricard said, and make sure she's unharmed.
Don't worry about that,
Vojki said.
Just get the money, and all will be well.
He hung up, then went back upstairs where Simon was waiting.
This will work,
he said, greatly pleased with himself.
We'll collect twice and be paid for the writer as well as the Polish girl.
You're a very smart fellow, Simon told him.
Well, that's your good luck,
Vojki said.
She's a pretty girl,
Kasia is. Why don't we put her on the bed and then, when I'm done, it's your turn?
Leave her alone, Simon. That kind of thing can come back and hurt you.
I don't see how. Simon was clearly not convinced, and when Vojki went out on an errand, he sat on the bed next to Kasia's chair and put a hand on her knee. Kasia moved away and said,
"Leave me alone, connard."
No, don't be like that. Here we have some time together. Let's make the most of it.
Let's not,
Kasia said. He reached out, grabbed Kasia by the neck with one hand, and with the other began to stroke her breasts. Kasia wriggled free and swore at him. He laughed, then knelt in front of her and tried to force her knees apart. Kasia's foot fitted nicely in the throat area below Simon's chin, and the kick was powerful enough to send him sprawling on his backside.
"Oh, a minx," he said. "You like to fight before you do it. I know the type."
He stood, took a gravity knife from his pocket, and let the blade fall free, then turned it so it gleamed in the lamplight.
"You'll get no ransom if you cut me up,"
Kasia said, voice level.
"Nobody buys damaged goods."
Simon stared at her a moment, not sure how to get what he wanted.
"Now go find someone else to pester,"
Kasia said. Simon muttered something to himself and put the knife back in his pocket. "Your friends had better come up with the money," he said, "or I'll finish what I started." Ricard met with Adrian at a cafe. "Kasia's been kidnapped. This man called Vojki's going to sell her to the Gestapo unless I pay him $5,000. Adrian thought for a time, then said, "Pay in person?" "Yes, that's what he said. The money must be paid in 2 days." "So there will come a time when you, Kasia, and $5,000 will be in the same place. Do I have that right?" Ricard said he did. Adrian sighed. "Ricard, forgive me, but has it ever occurred to you that you're not cut out for this business?" "Many times." "Where will this happen?" "They will telephone on the morning of the 15th. "Very well. Here's what you're going to do." On the morning of the 12th, Ricard was waiting by his telephone when it rang. "Yes?" On the other end of the line, Vojki said, "Do you have the money?" "Not yet. A friend will help me, but the meeting has to be out near his bank." He won't carry that much money around the city. He says it's too dangerous. Where does he want to meet? On the Impasse du Ruisseau. Where the hell is that? Out in Montreuil. His bank is on the next street. No, Vojki said firmly. We'll set the place and time. Adrian had warned Ricard, had told him he would have to gamble. Ricard said, and there's nothing I can do about it. From Vojki, a long silence while the telephone line hissed. Well, that's too bad. I'll have to contact the Gestapo. They'll do the paying. Not that much, Ricard said. Again, Vojki paused, but his greed for a double payment was irresistible, and he knew that Ricard's assumption about the Gestapo was correct. Say again the place, he said. The Impasse du Ruisseau. The time is 9 at night. Then it's set. Vojki grumbled, very much displeased. Adrian was standing next to Ricard, and as Ricard hung up, Adrian said, Did he buy it? I think so. Adrian sent a telegram to the Prestige taxi company in Orléans, asking Jules and Henri, the résistants who had executed the salon owner Lolotte, if they would do a job in Paris. A few hours later they responded. The answer was yes. They liked working for Adrian. He paid immediately, and paid well. The two took a train up to Paris and registered at a small hotel. It rained on the evening of the 12th, and without moon and stars the city was as dark as it ever got, the blue-painted street lamps casting no more than a dull glow on the empty streets. At 8:30, Adrian drove a delivery van to the entry of the Rue de la Huchette, and Ricard climbed in beside him. As the engine idled, Adrian handed Ricard a weapon, an M1935 7.65 semi-automatic pistol. Know how to use it? Adrian said. I think so. Is this the safety? Yes, then pull the housing towards you to arm it. You've got 8 rounds in there. Adrian drove to a street near the Impasse du Ruisseau and parked the truck. 10 minutes later, Henri and Jules appeared, and Adrian introduced them to Ricard. No last names, just Jules and Henri. Rain dripping off the lowered brims of their hats. All 4 were tense, smoked cigarette after cigarette, and glanced too often at their watches. A few minutes before 9 o'clock, Jules and Henri entered the empty impasse and found doorways on either side of the street. At the dead end of the street was the back of a factory, where, covered by a steel grill, some large, noisy machine was at work, drumming away and loud enough that they had to raise their voices almost to a shout in order to be heard. Precisely at 9, Ricard, carrying a paper bag that held $5,000, entered the impasse and waited at the far end of the street. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Ricard looked back at Adrian, who stood to one side of the impasse entry, as though to say, What do I do now? Adrian made a calming gesture with his hand. Wait. Just as Ricard turned back to face the street, 2 shadows appeared, walking cautiously towards them. When Ricard could make out faces, he saw 2 men he'd never seen before. One of the men gestured with a revolver. Come towards us. Ricard approached. Vojki and Simon watched him carefully, especially watched his hands. Vojki said, voice raised above the drumming machine, Do you have the money? Ricard handed over the paper bag. Vojki peered inside and counted to himself. When he was done, Ricard said, Where is Kasia? You'll see her soon, Vojki said. Now, turn around and put your hands behind your back. Then Vojki circled behind him, and tied his wrists with twine, tight enough to hurt, then ran his hands over Ricard's raincoat and took the 7.65 pistol. Vosky and Simon then walked Ricard back towards the factory. When they were close to the end of the street, Ricard could make out a narrow alleyway that ran between the side of the factory and the next building. Another factory. As he was led into the alley, he thought, "I'm finished. They're not coming." But they were. Gilles and Henri had screwed long silencers into the barrels of their automatics, and the shots were like sibilant whispers. Vosky let go of Ricard and sank to his knees. "You'll never," he said as he died. Simon had been shot in the leg and fallen face down on the cobblestone, whining with pain. Gilles turned him over, found Ricard's 7.65 automatic in his pocket, untied his hands and gave it to him. "I believe this is yours," he said. Next he found Vosky's pistol beneath his chest, then took the clasp knife from his pocket. He opened it and said to Ricard, "They're on their way." Ricard heard Gilles say, "Where's the girl?" Next he heard Simon scream, "The Hôtel Briand! The Hôtel Briand!" "Where is it?" "On the Rue de Rocher, by the Gare Saint-Lazare." Gilles said to Henri, "Go get the truck. We're taking the two of them with us. I'm leaving this one alive in case he's lying to us." Then he said to Simon, who was moaning and holding his leg, "You are not lying to us, are you?" "No, that's the hotel. The girl is in room 502. Panic at the edge of his voice, Simon whined, "I swear, monsieur, I swear it." Gilles then took Vosky's shirt in his hands and tore off a strip of fabric, then raised Simon's trouser leg and tied the bandage around a bloody hole in his right leg. Adrien and Ricard loaded the wounded Simon and Vosky's body into the truck. Then Gilles slid into the driver's seat. "Where will you take them?" Ricard said. "I'll leave them just outside a hospital. The doctors will take care of Simon's wound, and they'll send the other one to the morgue. Maybe then they will call the police. Or they won't. It doesn't matter." Kasha remained a captive at the Hôtel Briand. At an apartment building across the street, Adrien and Ricard talked to the concierge, who let them into a vacant apartment on the 3rd floor. From there they watched the hotel. German officers were going in and out, some of them in SS uniforms. They would surely question Kasha, but they would get nothing out of her, at least not right away. How to get her out of the building? Ricard asked Adrien. "Gilles is still in Paris. I can call his hotel and ask him to help." In mid-afternoon, Gilles showed up at the apartment. "We need your help again," Ricard said. "They've got Kasha in their private hotel there, across the street." Gilles watched for a time, then said, "Well, there is a way, but it's going to make the Gestapo really mad." "I don't care. Do what you have to do," Ricard said. They waited until late afternoon, a chilly, rainy November afternoon. Then Gilles left the apartment. They could see him from the apartment window, crossed the street, and disappeared into the alley that ran behind the back entrance to the hotel. 10 slow minutes passed. Then Gilles showed up, breathing hard and dusted with coal soot. "Now we wait," he said. A minute or two later there was a muffled bang inside the hotel. A window shattered, and then from the hotel's chimneys a huge cloud of coal dust was blown over the street. It was still floating down when in a window on the 1st floor of the hotel, an orange light flickered. German officers began to rush from the hotel, coughing in the sooty fog. And with bells ringing and siren wailing, a fire truck turned the corner and parked in front of the hotel. As the firemen unreeled their hoses, Kasha appeared. She'd been untied but was flanked by 2 Germans, who held her arms. With a violent effort, she wriggled free, ran to one of the firemen and cried out, "Save me!" As the fireman asked her what was going on, her 2 captors disappeared down the street. Adrian, Gilles and Ricard had run down the stairs and out into the street, and when Kasia saw them, she ran to Ricard and embraced him. Then the 3 drove away in Adrian's truck, finally stopping by a small park. Kasia thanked the others. Then Ricard offered her a cigarette, a Balto, from a packet with a cartoon of a sultan wearing a turban. Ricard lit the cigarette. Kasia inhaled and scowled. "A terrible cigarette. What became of your gitane?" "The black market supply dried up. So everyone smokes these." "What happens now?" Ricard asked Adrian. "Eventually, you and Kasia are going to have to disappear. For how long, I can't say. Maybe you can hide in Paris, maybe in France or America. Right now, you need to find a safe house, my friends, and don't tell anybody where it is." Well, they had a safe house, rented at Adrian's direction back in September, out in the 12th, a long way from nowhere by Parisian standards, overlooking the La Chapelle freight yards and the wine warehouses in Bercy. All it needed was furniture. Adrian drove the truck out to the flea market at the Porte de Vanves. On the way, Ricard asked about Gilles. How did he come to know such clever tricks with explosives? "Trained," Adrian said. "They train in Scotland, 2 months of it, learn every sort of mayhem and violence. I would say he is in France as an agent of the Special Operations people, though he would never admit that, but he's here to cause chaos, to blow things up, to cut telephone lines, to kill German officers." At the market, they bought 8 well-used mattresses, thin and lumpy with use, but better than sleeping on the floor. They bought pots and pans and plates, including a heavy iron pot big enough to cook a stew for 10 people. They bought mugs for coffee and worn towels with faded blue stripes. "We must have a radio," Ricard said, found a table of radios and turned them on and off until he found one, an old Philco in a walnut case with a curved top, that worked. They bought a small kerosene stove, then loaded everything into the truck and drove back towards central Paris, on the Boulevard Brune, and right into a French police roadblock. Supervised by the wrong kind of flic, a stern fellow with grey hair and puppet lines by his mouth. He looked in the window of the truck, saw Adrian and Ricard and Kasia in the front seat and smelled artist, radical, communist, bohemian, smelled the Saint-Germain-des-Prés on them. Oh, he knew who they were, all right, knew what they were, had never liked it in the past and didn't like it now. "Pull your truck over and start unloading," he said. They did as they were ordered, leaving the mattresses inside. The household possessions didn't look their best in the grey drizzle. "What's all this?" he said, voice hard and unforgiving. Kasia is so good, Ricard thought. She pretended to find the flic the sort of master she liked to obey, a disapproving and severe papa. She called him Monsieur l'Agent, starting each sentence with it. She was his to command. "We are moving to a new apartment, Monsieur l'Agent." "Where is that?" "In the student district, sir. My friend and I will attend the Sorbonne in the autumn." What a clever little submissive you are, Kasia. Your dominatrix, whoever she is lately, would be proud of your theatre. Ricard could see that all the cooing and Monsieur l'Agenting was having its effect. "A good thing, education, but you must study hard, ma fille." Jesus, my daughter, he calls her. Ricard thought, "and not spend your time in idle frivolity." "I promise to work so hard, sir," Kasia said. Could that be? Ricard thought, the merest edge of a smile on that sour puss of a face. "Best to put your things back now," the flic said. "You don't want them to get wet in this rain." The three hurriedly reloaded the truck, and just as Adrian shifted into first gear, the flic saluted them, touched the brim of his kepi with his index finger.
"Now we go to work,"
Adrian said, and headed for the safe house.
End of Disc 5. Disc 6.
A day later, Ricard was again Paul Ricard, the novelist. 2 weeks earlier, Julien Montresor of Les Éditions Montresor had scheduled a publication party for Ricard's new book, Midnight in Trieste. The party was held in the breakfast room of a hotel, and when Ricard arrived, promptly at 7, a waiter had already set out bottles of cheap, thin champagne, and was now wandering around the crowded room with a tray of canapés, quickly gobbled up by the hungry guests. The party was much like those which had celebrated Ricard's previous publications. Here and there he saw familiar faces, writers, editors, book reviewers. But most of the guests were invited from a list that Montresor maintained, people who showed up, people who filled out the room. Ricard spoke briefly with Montresor, who was complimentary, but stroking his Mephistophelian beard kept looking over Ricard's shoulder to see who he should talk to next. Mixed in among the crowd were those people who could be useful to a publisher. Ricard didn't mind. Montresor was who he was, and climbed socially when he saw an opportunity. But he was a good publisher. He knew how to sell books, and royalty checks showed up in Ricard's mail. Then, out of the crowd, an unexpected guest appeared. Colonel Deroux, who had apparently journeyed down from his house in Les Andelys for the party. Ricard was pleased that he'd come, and said so.
"How goes the book?"
Deroux said.
"It's got some good reviews. Now we'll see if it sells." "That's good to hear. By the way, I've brought a friend along. He's taken a room at the hotel, and when you have a minute, he'd like to congratulate you on your publication. He's in room 220, just above us."
A nameless friend, Ricard thought. Which means I am going back to work. When the party ended, just about the time the last bottle of champagne had been drunk, Ricard went up to room 220 and tapped on the door. From inside, a deep, authoritative voice said, "Entrez." Inside, 2 heavy-set men in suits, one of them holding an automatic by his leg, and, seated in the shabby room's only chair, an aristocrat. He had the look seen in portraits on the walls of fine houses, with a prominent nose and hair combed to one side. A member, Ricard thought, of the high elite of France, with a bearing that suggested power and prerogative. If he'd been seen getting out of a chauffeured car, the passer-by would wonder, who is that? Because he was clearly somebody important. He was, Ricard thought, no doubt titled a marquis or a comte, owning estates and villages and currently fighting for France as his ancestors surely had. He did not offer a name, and Ricard thought of him as the officer.
"Good evening," the officer said. "I hope your party went well."
"It did, thank you."
"And the best of luck with your new book."
"Again, thank you." Ricard now sat on the edge of the bed in the darkened hotel room. Behind drawn curtains, rain was beating against the window. Leaning forward, the officer said,
"I've been talking to your controller,"
which meant Adrian, though it took a moment for Ricard to make the connection.
"And,"
the officer continued,
"he tells me that you have established a safe house
on the Rue Crémieux." "We have. It is now furnished and ready for use." The officer nodded, then said,
"The war is changing, Monsieur Ricard. That won't be evident for a long time, But we must now think about the next stage here in France. Not this year, maybe not even next year. But the time of invasion is approaching. British and American forces will attack the coast of France, somewhere in the north, and will begin to drive the German army back across the Rhine. This landing must be accompanied by an insurrection. Thousands of French men and women will take part, and their attacks, sabotage, train tracks ripped up, telegraph wires cut, will draw German troops away from coastal defense. But to do this, the people will need weapons, rifles, Sten guns, heavy machine guns, and anti-tank weapons. These will be brought in by the British aircraft known as Westland Lysanders. These Lysanders, small, agile, and fast, are able to fly 50 feet above the ground and under enemy radar. They have been landing on French fields, bringing in weapons and munitions, and ferrying agents in and out of the country since the early days of the occupation. Once the deliveries have been picked up, the arms will be stored in safe houses, private homes, factories, warehouses, and barns. And that will include the safe house on the Rue Crémieux. I know you understand all of this. Yes, I do, Ricard said. He had listened carefully to this officer, who was perhaps the most senior member of the resistance he would ever meet. We are gathering résistants to work in this operation. Reception committees for the Lysanders, people who know the countryside and can find open fields for landing zones, people who can store the weapons, people who can do the physical work of transporting them to safe houses. So, we want to recruit you, and whoever you can trust, family or lifelong friends, to work in this operation. It's dangerous work. The Gestapo knows this is coming and will try to disrupt the deliveries, will attempt to insert their own agents among the résistants, will send patrols to the countryside. So then, will you join us? Tell me when and where. Ricard said, and I'll be there, and bring at least one person along with me. Then we'll notify your controller, and he will provide the details. The interview was over. As Ricard stood up to leave the room, the officer said, "And good luck to you, monsieur." The coded telephone call came a week later, as the first flakes of December snow floated down on the Rue de la Hichette. Ricard had recruited Kasha to help in the operation, and, following Adrian's direction, called her at 9 in the evening, and she was at his apartment by 9:20. Adrian picked them up in his truck 10 minutes later, then drove northwest from Paris, reaching the city of Beauvais an hour later. As they left the deserted streets of the city, Adrian gave each of them a torch, then handed Ricard a pencil-drawn map. Now Ricard lowered the window, despite the snow, in order to see better, and he searched for the road on the map. It didn't appear right away, and Ricard feared he'd missed it. But then there it was. Not much of a road, Ricard thought, more like a cowpath, with holes large enough to break an axle. Adrian could drive no more than 5 miles an hour, foot riding the clutch pedal as the truck threatened to stall, then did stall, and Adrian had to use the ignition, which worked, though twice Ricard held his breath as the starter motor whined on, and was close to killing the battery until, at last, it got the engine to turn over. By 10:30 they'd reached an old tyre lying by the road, noted on the map next to an X. Adrian used his torch, which showed them a hedgerow border across the field. In fact, they discovered soon enough, wiping their shoes on the weeds, a cow pasture. As the three neared the hedgerow, the beam of a torch lit them up, and a voice behind the light said, "Password." "Avignon," Adrian replied. The man in the darkness said, "Symphony," the countersign. When they reached him, they saw that he was not alone. 5 other men were ranged out behind him, some dressed in suits and overcoats. Others wore workers' rough jackets and berets. All of them were armed,
one with a shotgun, 3 with rifles, and the last, like the leader, had a Sten gun.
"You have your truck?"
the leader said. "I do," Adrian said. "Will they fly in this weather?"
"It's clear in England, and they can land on snow. They can land on anything. The flight is due in half an hour. In the meantime, we have some shelter on the other side of the hedge."
He led the 3 through an opening in the hedge to a burned-out farmhouse. There they waited, smoking and drinking sour wine from bottles without labels. So, here is the French resistance, Ricard thought. No names were given, but from conversation under a remaining part of the roof that gave them shelter, 2 of them were brothers, a third was a cousin. The other 2, long-time friends. At 12:30, they returned to the cow pasture. Then 3 of the men stood in a line that showed the direction of the wind, guiding the pilot to his landing path, and a 4th stood to one side. When they heard the engine of the approaching Lysander, the 3 turned on their torches, aimed at the Lysander, while the 4th signalled to the pilot with the Morse code letter C, dash dot, and the pilot responded with the airplane's landing lights, blinking the same letter. The Lysander set its wheels down at the far end of the pasture and taxied up to the group. Then the pilot vaulted out, followed by another man who said, "I'm called Fauré. I'm the one you're waiting for to take to Paris." The pilot and 3 of the Résistants then unloaded 2 aluminium cylinders from the Lysander and carried them, sometimes slipping on the snow, to Adrian's truck. Next, they pushed the Lysander to a position facing the wind. The plane's pilot gave the Lysander full throttle. The wheels bounced across the uneven surface. Then, almost at the end of the pasture, the plane lifted, just managing to clear the trees, and the sound of its engine faded away into the night. The Résistant disappeared into the darkness, heading for the car they'd arrived in. It was almost 2 a.m. before the truck reached the Rue Crémieux safe house, where Adrian, Ricard, Casha, and Fauré carried the cylinders upstairs. They were breathing hard when they finished, and Fauré said, "Heavy, no? There are 40 rifles for the resistance in these things, and plenty of ammunition." "When do we move them?" Adrian said. "You don't, unless you think they would be safer somewhere else." In the light of the house they got a better look at Fauré. He was dressed as a French businessman, in hat and overcoat, and carried a briefcase. He was, Ricard guessed, about 40 years old. "So, back in France?" Ricard said. "Yes, at last. I used to be a salesman of stationery, but I had problems with the Gestapo and fled to London, to de Gaulle." "You met him?" Ricard said. "Yes, for 10 minutes. Otherwise, I waited in a hotel." "And waited." "You wanted to come home to France?" Adrian said. "Yes, and to fight," Fauré said. By December of 1942, France was the land of the fugitive. Jews in hiding wanted to get to Spain, and eventually to New York or Palestine. Agents of 3 countries, France, Poland, and Britain, were constantly on the move, working across borders in and out of the country. Then there were the people who could no longer bear living under occupation. Had the man at the next cafe table been a Gestapo agent? Or was he just nosy? He'd surely tried to listen to the conversation. Also, there were the usual fugitives, in flight from angry wives or mistresses, in flight from debt, in flight from the police for business crimes or prosecution for unpaid taxes. This was, taken all together, a considerable number of people who wanted to be somewhere else. So then, how to do that? In a country where newspapers were edited by an occupying enemy, gossip became the only source for information. One forever heard a sentence begin, "My friend Louis says," or "My doctor told me," or "The woman who cleans my apartment has a friend who—" Yes, there was the BBC. But that was international news, rarely Parisian news, and one could be shot for listening to it. Fascist teenagers stood under apartment windows at 9 in the evening, listening for the English voice, and ready to denounce the tenant. In private, talking to friends and family, the possibility of getting out of the country was at least discussed. It was said that there were escape lines that ran all through France and down into Spain. Were they just for secret agents, or could civilians use them? "Do you know anybody?" became a common question. The answer was almost always no. Some of the fugitives kept to their apartments. Others went about their daily business and pretended that nothing was wrong. The war wouldn't last forever. They would wait it out. And waiting, attentisme, became a kind of café philosophy. Meanwhile, except for the storage of arms, the Rue Crémieux house stood empty. But for the civil servants in London, it was time to change that. They needed somewhere safe for their agents moving through Paris, and decided to use the Rue Crémieux house, which meant it had to be staffed with operatives. 3 of them, as always, a radio operator, an agent, and a courier. As was customary for the special operations people, they sent their own trained radio operator to see Adrian. He was called Bondeau, a former bank clerk in Lyon, a tall, thin, grey man with a tall face, hair shaven high above his ears. And he was installed at the Rue Crémieux, running his radio aerial up the chimney. Ricard was chosen to be the resident agent, with Kasha working as courier. SS Erhard Geisler sat in his office at the Hôtel Majestic and brooded about safe houses and escape lines. His SD superiors in Berlin were riding him hard about the subject. This form of resistance had to be stopped right away because it facilitated operations by the British enemy against the Reich. The agents who used these houses and travelled on the lines were often saboteurs. They blew up factories that produced war materiel. And fighting against the endless Russian forces, the Wehrmacht needed all the weapons and vehicles that could be produced in the factories of occupied Europe. How to operate against them? Geisler needed an agent, someone who could infiltrate the British scheme and identify the people who made it work. Only then, when they had names and addresses, could they make arrests. And the interrogations that would follow arrests would bring them more résistants. That would mean success. That would bring medals and promotion. Now, Ricard had to stay at the Rue Crémieux house to take care of the agents who would be using it. And so, with a sigh in his heart, he abandoned his garret and installed himself in the safe house. The most difficult aspect to this move was that Ricard had to stay out of sight. He was used to his life in Paris, wandering the lovely old streets that always curved out of sight, stopping at his favourite haunts, this street market, that museum, the quay that ran along the edge of the Seine, his preferred place to stare at the river, along with a favoured bridge or two, and the Saint-Germain-des-Prés cafes, where he read novels instead of the dreadful newspapers. Then, on a clear, starry night, Christmas close at hand, he had his first safe-house agent. After a coded telephone call from Adrian, the courier Kasha retrieved a British operative from the Gare du Nord, a young woman who used the alias Béatrice. Very good-looking. Béatrice, an English girl who had grown up in the Valais, the French-speaking part of Switzerland. Kasha used the black market shops and found her something to eat, a hard Cantal cheese, a decent baguette, a bowl of lentils, a bottle of Algerian wine, and one small, tired eclair. This last nearly brought Beatrice to tears, tough as she was, determined as she was. "Would you like to share?" she asked. "No, my dear," Kasia said. "It's for you." "I used to eat these, a treat, sometimes after school. I fear I never really appreciated it. Just something my maman had bought for me." Beatrice couldn't say a word about where she'd been or where she was going, or what she was tasked to do there. According to the talk in the cafes, the Gestapo was lately fierce, capturing and interrogating agents. The idea of Beatrice falling into their hands upset Ricard, perhaps because he was insufficiently cold-hearted for the work he did now. But nonetheless he felt protective of this girl, though there wasn't much he could do to protect her. Some food, a night or two of safe sleep. Then she would be on her way. 2 days later, Kasia led her to a street in the 4th arrondissement, and that was the last they saw of her. The next agent was very different. Using the alias Raphael, he arrived after a telephone call from Adrian on Christmas Eve, and Kasia retrieved him from the Duroc metro station. Raphael was a Spaniard, one of many who had managed to cross the Pyrenees into France after the defeat of the Spanish Republic's army in 1939. There were hundreds of such fugitives in France, and after 1940, most of them, intrepid fighters, joined the resistance. Raphael was then recruited by the SOE and assigned to stay in France and operate in the region north of Paris, Lower Normandy. He was 30 or so, lithe and dark-skinned, handsome and shy. He sat in the kitchen of the Rue Crémieux house and ate sparingly. Surely he was famished, but despite gentle urging from Ricard and Kasia, would eat no more than what he supposed to be his share, leaving food for other hungry people. "It is good of you," he said in slow French, "to take me in and feed me." "It is our pleasure to do this," Ricard said. "And you fight alongside us in the war," Kasia added. Raphael nodded slowly. "I know," he said, "but still, it is an old habit to leave something for those who will follow me, God willing." Ricard poured the last of a bottle of the Algerian wine into a water glass and handed it to Raphael. "It is Christmas Eve, sir, and we must celebrate a little, as best we can." He then opened a new bottle and poured wine for himself and Kasia. "Joyeux Noël," he said. Raphael then raised his glass and wished Ricard and Kasia a Joyeux Noël. "Feliz Navidad," Ricard said. "Is that right?" Raphael said. "Yes, Feliz Navidad. It makes me feel good just to say it. I spent last Christmas in a trench in Madrid, near the medical school. We shared an extra ration of bread that night to celebrate." "What did you do before the war?" Kasia asked. "My family owned a wine bar, a bodega, in Madrid, and I worked there. I grew up in the bar, a lively place, people singing, lovers holding hands, dogs and cats and children all over the place. It was a fine way to grow up, hearing stories from travelers, listening to the conversations of students who argued about our poets, which one was deep, which sentimental. They cared greatly about such things back then. In time, by 1936, I became a soldier, fighting the fascists. Still I fight them, but they don't go away." "The day will come," Kasia said. "To that," Raphael said, raising his glass. "Tell me, is it safe to go out at night?"
No, it isn't. Ricard said. The Gestapo is lately very active at night, before curfew.
Curfew is at 11.
Yes, but not tonight. The Germans have said that tonight we're allowed to be out on the street until 2.
So people may attend midnight mass, Christmas mass,
Raphael said. Yes, just so.
Ricard said. That is what I would like to do. Will it put you in danger? Probably I should go alone.
For a long moment, Ricard and Kasia looked at each other. Then Ricard said, No, we will go together.
There is a church nearby.
There is a lovely church, Ricard said. A few blocks from here. It is by a little park where there is a tree with a plaque that says it is the oldest tree in Paris. Saint-Julien-le-Pauvre, the church is called. Raphael brightened.
Then let's go there, he said. Is it far?
No, we can walk there in 20 minutes, Ricard said. They waited for a time, drinking the wine, then left the Rue Crémieux house and walked along the Seine. The Parisians were out in the streets. They'd always liked the later hours of the evening. And a fine snow drifted down over the city on the windless night. 3 days later, Kasia picked up an agent who'd been hiding in a cellar up in Saint-Denis. He carried with him a small leather bag, which, when he set it down carefully on the floor of the kitchen, smelled like almonds. I've got explosives in here, he said. 808 it's called. Plastique to the French. So don't move it. He was different from the first agents they'd hidden in the safe house. Perhaps a soldier in the French army before the surrender, with a weathered, sun-tanned face, and eyes aware of everything that went on around him. Do you have anything to drink? He asked Ricard, once he'd settled in. We have some wine, Ricard said. Algerian wine. I'd like some of that. We drank it all the time when I was a legionnaire. He meant, Ricard knew, the French Foreign Legion. The soldier drank a lot of wine but was never close to getting drunk. He was in action, under orders, and, Ricard thought, would get no relief from wine or anything else until his mission was completed. He stayed the night and left for the Gare de Lyon at dawn. The 10th day of January, the holidays over. Now to somehow live through the winter which stretched out ahead forever. The low sky was oppressive, the colour of ashes, as it would be for a long time. And there was frost on the windows of the houses and the shops. Fauré, the middle-aged stationery salesman who'd been brought in by Lysander, had been ordered to conduct surveillance on a large chemical factory in the town of Évreux, west of Paris, where several varieties of explosives were manufactured, a factory high on the list of facilities that the civil servants wanted destroyed. Fauré left his hiding place in Paris, where he'd gone after leaving the Rue Crémieux safe house, and took the train to Évreux. There'd been a military airfield here since the 1920s, and the chemical plant had been built, along with other industrial sites, to support the operations of French bombers and fighter planes. Now it was a German airbase, which invited the attention of RAF planners. The Romain et Fils Usine Chimique was situated at the western edge of the town, far from the Norman cathedral and the half-timbered houses and hotels of the centre-ville. So Fauré walked for a long time, shivering in the January chill, until he reached the neighbourhood of the factory, where he found narrow streets of workers' housing and a few local bars and cafes. He also found Gestapo patrols, as well as local police on their bicycles. The factory and the airfield were crucial to the German war effort. Fauré had a camera but was afraid to take it out of his briefcase. Not here, he thought.
He spent some time watching the factory, where the acrid smell of chemicals hung in the still air and made it hard to breathe. The lights were on in the windows, and vans at the loading dock behind the 3-story building were being filled with metal drums. A busy place, with 3 8-hour shifts, he'd been told. Nearby was a bar where he could contact the local resistance group, which had been ordered to attack the plant, eliminate the guards posted by the doors, then set the factory ablaze. Once the flames reached the vats of chemicals, there would be explosions and fires. Most of the plant's workers were not expected to survive. Fauré entered the bar and asked for Claude, his resistance contact, then took a coffee to one of the empty tables. Claude turned out to be a stout young man who wore a leather apron over his worker's outfit. Fauré gave the parole, and Claude responded.
"We've been expecting a resistance agent," he said. "What do you need from us?"
"I'm here to organize the destruction of the chemical works," Fauré said.
Claude nodded. "Yes, it's an obvious target. The British tried to bomb it last month, but it's hard to see from the air. The German fighter planes took off immediately from the local airfield, and the bombers turned around and beat it back to England."
Fauré was sympathetic.
"I know. This job has to be done on the ground. You can try. But the factory is carefully guarded," Claude said.
"Surely your friends can deal with that."
"Yes, I suppose they could, but they're not in a hurry to start trouble."
"No?"
"No. You must have seen the workers' housing on your way here. There are 500 jobs at this plant. Good jobs, well-paid jobs. When the plant goes, all those jobs go with it, which means we will all wind up as slave laborers in German factories."
"I'll tell them that,"
Fauré said. "The people who want the plant destroyed, that they'll have to think of something else."
But Fauré was lying, and Claude knew it.
"Yes, that's what you should do," he said. "This is how it is when you're at war."
Fauré didn't say that, but both men knew it was true, that the people who had issued the order were not going to argue. They were not going to negotiate. They had ordered their agents to destroy a certain target, so it would be destroyed.
"I will be in contact with you," Fauré said. "Then au revoir," Claude said, left the table and headed for the door.
Fauré almost called out to him. Perhaps they should talk this over for a little while longer. But then, with a shrug, he left the bar and began to walk back towards the Évreux railway station. He almost made it, but Claude had reacted quickly to the threat and defended himself, and the chemical plant workers, without hesitation. Fauré was a secret operative who knew where he might be hiding, so Claude had made the telephone call to the Gestapo. A few hundred feet from the railway station, a Gestapo Citroën pulled up next to Fauré, who briefly tried to run for it, but the Gestapo operatives jumped out of their car, knocked Fauré to the ground, hauled him to his feet, then threw him in the back of the car. 10 minutes later he was hustled into the Gestapo's Évreux headquarters, taken to the cellar, and tied to a chair. They let him sit there and think about it for an hour. Then an officer, whom the sergeant addressed as Sturmbannführer, Major Geisler, sat in a chair and lit a cigarette while the sergeant took off his tunic, rolled up his sleeves, produced a rubber truncheon, and tapped Fauré on the knee. Pain exploded in Fauré's kneecap. He couldn't believe how much it hurt. The man had simply snapped the instrument with his wrist. "We are just getting warmed up," Geisler said. "This should take half an hour, more or less." "What do you want to know?" Fauré said, panic in his voice. The sergeant tapped him again, and Geisler said, Can you repeat that? I didn't quite hear you. Just ask, I'll tell you anything. Now he was pleading. We've heard there is a safe house somewhere in the 12th. Where is it? On the Rue Crémieux. What number? I don't think it has a number. Tap. This one was a little harder. The sergeant was a master of his craft, and Faure heard himself say, "Ah!" Not loud, the syllable forced from him. "Soon you will sing like a nightingale," Geisler said, and nodded to the sergeant. Faure cried out, "No more!" Geisler stood up, then knelt in front of Faure, tied tight to the chair. "Now I shall tell you what we are going to do," he said, the menace in his voice deeper as he pitched it to a level of quiet gentility. "We are going to keep you here, and we are going to have a look at the Rue Crémieux. Next you will accompany us, and you will indicate which house the British agents are using. If you fool us—" "Yes, I understand," Faure said. Geisler was reflective as he said, "Perhaps you do. We shall see." Ricard and Kasha continued to work at the safe house. Every 2 or 3 days another agent appeared, then vanished the following day, usually at night. Kasha brought in what food she could find. Ricard stayed hidden. Then on the 17th of January, late on a grey afternoon, Kasha said, "They are in the neighborhood. Germans in civilian suits, expensive suits." Ricard went out to see for himself. Kasha was right. The Gestapo was working the local streets. They were trying to be subtle, reading newspapers in the cafes, strolling down the street insouciant as could be, but from their dress, from their military posture, from their proper haircuts, it was clear as day who they were, what they were. They had a bad effect on Ricard. He was afraid of them, and he suspected they were there for him. So he took a chance, went to the Rue de la Huchette, and took the 7.65 automatic from the drawer of his desk, just beneath his typewriter, and the manuscript of his new book. He was not going to be taken alive and tortured by the Gestapo, and if they tried to arrest him, he was going to fight. That would be the end, but he meant to take 2 or 3 of them with him. By nightfall, an ice fog had gathered over the city. Then wind-driven snow began to cover the street. From the window of the safe house, Ricard could only just see the La Chapelle railway tracks. Snow was swirling above them, driven by the wind that sighed at the corners of the building. On the tracks, a lone switching engine made its slow way into the tunnel. On the Rue Crémieux, a black Mercedes cruised past the house, the yellow beams of its headlights cutting through the darkness. As Ricard and Kasha watched, the car stopped, then backed up, and when a door opened, the dome light revealed 2 Gestapo officers in the front and 2 men in overcoats in the back. When the 2 men in the back left the car, Ricard saw Faure and a pear-shaped man holding on to his hat in the wind. Faure pointed at the house. The pear-shaped man nodded. Then both returned to the Mercedes. "We're fucked, Kasha," Ricard said. "I saw them." "So it's time to leave," Ricard said. The radio operator Bondoux shut down his transmission, closed the lid on the WT radio, which made it look like a typewriter case, and headed for the door. "Good luck," Bondoux said. "See you again someday." "I have to give the alert," Ricard said. He called Adrian's number, and through the storm's static on the line, Adrian said, Yes? Solitaire, Ricard said. The word was a warning signal. It meant drop whatever you're doing and run like hell. What's happened? Adrian said. I just saw Faure and what I think was a Gestapo officer in a suit. Faure had guided him to the house. Faure? Adrian mused. Then said, You'll have to take care of him. Take care of him? You know what I mean. He's put the entire operation in danger, so you'll have to do what needs to be done. And then? Get on a train, go somewhere. All right. Let me know when it's finished, Adrian said, and hung up. We have to find Faure, Ricard said. He has to be eliminated. He put on his hat and scarf and raised the collar of his overcoat. Kasia was waiting for him at the door, her worker's cap tilted down on her forehead. Anything you want in here? Ricard said. No, why? You won't see it again. From the telephone, a double whirring ring. Ricard picked up the receiver before it rang again. It was Layla. I just spoke to Adrian. He said you have a job to do, and then you'll have to leave Paris. Where can we meet? The Gare de Lyon is close. We'll meet there. Will you wait for me? Yes. Ricard and Kasia left the house and went out into the storm. Up the street, Ricard could see the light beams coming towards him as the Mercedes backed up. Ricard took the 7.65 from his coat pocket, made sure the clip was full, then snapped the magazine back in place and armed the weapon. Ricard took careful steps through the dry snow, crossed the street, and waited. Very slowly, the Mercedes approached him, and it was still moving when he stepped off the pavement and fired through the driver's window. From the other side of the car he could barely hear the reports of Kasia's little .25. But the passenger slumped over, his head in the driver's lap as the driver died, with his forehead resting on the steering wheel. From the back seat, SS Erhard Geisler stumbled out of the car with his hands in the air. "Don't shoot," he said, raising his voice above the wind. A ruse. He didn't intend to surrender, and when his hand reached inside his coat, Kasia shot him below the left eye. "Don't," he said, and Kasia shot him again. He sat down on the snow, touched the wound with his finger, then fell backwards and lay still. Ricard swung the 7.65 towards Faure, who raised his hands, his eyes wide with fear. Then Ricard did what had to be done, and fired twice through the window, the bullets punching holes circled by crushed glass. Faure disappeared. Ricard tore the door open. Faure lay still, sprawled on the car's floor, his head having landed on the running board when Ricard opened the door. To make sure, Ricard fired once more, hitting Faure in the temple, the wound bleeding red onto the snow. Kasia and Ricard got away from the car as fast as they could. Then, out of breath, they found an apartment house with an open door and took refuge in the vestibule. "Now we're in for it," Ricard said. "You don't kill Gestapo officers. They'll be all over the place in minutes." "The storm will slow them down," Kasia said. "Not much. Their big Citroens have front-wheel drive. We'll have to hide, and not in our apartments." "There's a place we can go," Kasia said. "Do you remember we once met in a club on the Rue de Provence, out in the 9th, Le Coup de Foudre, it's called. My friends there will take care of us." "I do remember," Ricard said. "Women in black, smoking with cigarette holders. But I can't go there yet, so I'll contact you later." "Be careful, Ricard," Kasia said. Ricard took her by the shoulders and kissed her on the forehead. Then Kasia headed for the nearest métro. It was unwise to run down a street in an occupied city, so Ricard hurried as fast as he dared. When he reached the garret on the Rue de la Huchette, he had to sit down for a time, his hands shaking, his heart beating too hard. But he couldn't linger. He had to leave Paris. He opened his canvas valise, found a shirt, a pair of trousers, change of underwear, toothbrush, and razor, and laid all of it in the valise. Then he hesitated. Am I coming back here? Or will I never see it again? He didn't know, but he had no time to worry about it. He glanced at his watch, then put the manuscript of The Investigator, bound with rubber bands, into the valise, and set the 765 on top of it. When he'd closed the valise, the image of the gun and the novel stayed with him. A good subject for a painted still life, he thought. Paris, 1943. Leila would be waiting for him, he knew, so he walked quickly to the Gare de Lyon. The waiting room was packed, a sea of faces. Some travellers, some fugitives from the storm, some fugitives. Then he saw Leila, and their embrace was intense. He held her against him as tightly as he could. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," she said, voice unsteady. There was no chance of that, Ricard said, smoothing back her hair. We need a safe place to meet. There's a student hotel on the street that runs up to the Panthéon. I have things to do, so I'll meet you there tonight. Be careful, love, Leila said. Ricard kissed her on the forehead and went out into the storm. Escape. Now, Ricard had nowhere to go. The safe house on the Rue Crémieux was no longer safe, and a Gestapo Citroën was parked on the Place Saint-Michel, just beyond the Rue de la Huchette. So, valise in hand, he headed over to Éditions Montrésor on the Rue Jacob. The receptionist opened the inner office door. Montrésor saw who was coming to see him and said, "Ricard, come into the office." Then quickly shut the door behind him. "They're looking for you, Ricard. What did you do?" "A fight with a Gestapo officer. For him it ended badly." Montrésor nodded, not sorry to hear bad news for the Gestapo, but his face was tense with anxiety. "They've been here twice. They've been to my house in Neuilly. You are a much-wanted man." "I need somewhere to hide." "Not in Paris. Not in France. You have to get out of the country." Ricard took a deep breath. Montrésor was right, and Ricard knew it. "The word is around that you're an English spy," Montrésor said. "Well, I've done things for the resistance." "Then they'll have to hide you, because when the Gestapo finds out that someone hid you, that's the end of him and his family. The Germans are worse every day, their appetite for cruelty. So I shouldn't be here." "I'm sorry, Ricard. I'd like to help you, but—" "Yes, I understand. This building has a back door that leads to an alley. You should use it." Montrésor was silent, anxious for Ricard to leave. "Thank you. I'll take the back door." "Contact me when you're safe," Montrésor said. "I will," Ricard said, and left the office. Finally, he decided he had to use the hotel where he had arranged to meet Leila. So climbed the hill to the Sainte-Geneviève church and the Panthéon and approached the reception desk. At the desk he paid in advance for 2 nights. "Your passport, monsieur?" The clerk ran his finger over the signature in the guest register. "Ricard?" As Ricard handed over his passport, the clerk said, "Don't worry yourself, monsieur. The police pick them up every night and return them in the morning." "Yes, I know," Ricard said. The clerk gave him a big iron key on a wooden plaque that said Chambre 18. Ricard climbed the stairs, looked around the room, then, valise in hand, went back downstairs and headed for the post office, where they asked to see his passport before he entered the telephone booth. So he went off to find a cafe with a telephone. As usual, Leila's contact number was answered by a woman's voice, and Ricard gave her the name of his hotel. Then he called a friend, another writer, who said, "Don't call here again, Ricard," and hung up. The Gestapo's dossier, Ricard thought, had better information than he'd realized. He tried another friend, a friend from his time at the Sorbonne, whose wife answered and said, "I'll tell him you called. He'll surely call you back." But she did not ask for a telephone number. Desperate, Ricard went back to the hotel, where, at the reception desk, the clerk was speaking on the telephone, his voice low and confidential. When he'd hung up, Ricard said, "I'm leaving the hotel. Give me back my passport." "Oh, monsieur, I regret." Ricard unbuckled his valise and put the muzzle of the 765 under the clerk's chin, forcing his head back. "Give it to me, you sneaky little bastard, or I'll blow the top of your head off." The clerk, with trembling hands, returned his passport. "We'll see you after the war," Ricard said, and walked quickly out the door. Now he couldn't wait for Leila at the hotel, but he could, he thought, intercept her when she arrived. There was a small park across the street, and as the snow drifted down, Ricard sat on a bench that faced the doorway of the hotel. It was after 5, a night as black as any Ricard remembered, but he could see the hotel well enough. Where is she? He thought. As he waited, the cold began to work its way through his overcoat, and he pulled it tighter. People sometimes died of the cold in Paris when they had nowhere to shelter. The newspapers noted the death with one paragraph. Monsieur X, sometimes Madame X, was found frozen to death in an alley, in a doorway, sitting on a bench in the park. A still figure, Ricard thought, face glazed with ice. An hour passed, and it was getting colder as the evening wore on. If he went to a cafe, he might miss Leila, and she was now his only hope to get out of Paris, to get out of France. The Gestapo was watching the railway stations, but, he thought, Leila would know a way around that. Again he looked at his watch. 5 hours until curfew. But curfew didn't matter when it came to an operative like Leila. Ricard clapped his hands together in order to warm them. The cold had seeped through his gloves, and his fingers were stiff and numb. How much longer could he last? He rose from the bench and walked around the perimeter of the park, and realized that his feet were damp. The melting snow was soaking its way through his shoes. All he could do now was find a cafe with a telephone and try Leila's number again. Halfway down the hill, a student cafe, crowded on a cold night because when there wasn't enough heat in an apartment, a cafe with a wood or kerosene stove was a refuge. Ricard sat at the bar, all the tables were taken, and ordered a brandy. The barman stared at him, poured out his brandy, and slid it across the zinc bar. Then, without speaking, he handed Ricard a sheet of paper. A Gestapo circular with a faded photograph at the top, a mimeographed photograph of poor quality. But it was him. In the text below, a reward of 10,000 francs was offered for information leading to the arrest of Paul Ricard, of 9 Rue de la Huchette. Ricard handed the circular back to the barman, who said, "Drink your brandy, monsieur. One needs something on a night like this. But then you'll have to go." "I understand," Ricard said, slugged down his brandy, went back out into the night, and returned to the park across from the hotel. A few minutes later, a black Citroën pulled up to the door of the hotel, and 2 men in suits entered. Gestapo. That bastard of a reception clerk had called the police, Ricard thought. He had been denounced. Nothing new in Paris, but now it was his turn. And he could only hope that Layla hadn't visited the hotel in his absence. What if she had? What if she'd asked for him at the reception desk? What if the Gestapo was there for her? Sick at heart, he waited. 5 minutes went by, then 10. At last the 2 Gestapo men left the hotel and returned to their car. Ricard squatted down behind a bench as the Citroën's lights illuminated the park. Then the lights disappeared as the car turned onto another street. Just the 2 of them, he thought. No Layla. Again he began to walk. The fierce cold, burning the skin of his face, the powdery snow sometimes lifted by the wind and sent dancing in the air. So then, he thought, if Layla was not coming to his rescue, that left Adrian, his last chance. What had Adrian said in their last conversation? Get on a train, go somewhere. What if Adrian had done that very thing in response to the solitaire warning? Ricard returned to the student cafe where the barman was not happy to see him. So Ricard was contrite, apologetic. Eating crow was after all preferable to freezing to death. Forgive me, monsieur. It's the occupation. It's made me forget my manners. You'll get into trouble if you go on that way, the barman said. Yes, you're right. I apologize. Ricard extended his hand, and after a beat the barman took it in his own. I would be very grateful if you would permit me to use the telephone. Very well, the barman said, not entirely appeased. Ricard lifted the receiver and dialed Layla's number, but there was no answer. Then he tried Adrian. The telephone rang and rang. Nobody answered. I dialed the wrong number, Ricard thought, and tried again with the same result. He looked at his watch. It was now 9:25. The 11 o'clock curfew was approaching, and that would mean real trouble. Ricard looked around the cafe and saw a girl, likely a student, sitting alone at a table. Ricard ordered a coffee, took it over to the girl's table and said, Do you mind if I join you? It's crowded in here tonight. The girl considered it, then said, Avec plaisir, monsieur. She didn't mean the words, with pleasure. Her response was a formula. Still, he sat down, took off his wet gloves, and wrapped his ice-cold hands around the warm cup. Ricard saw that the girl had nearly finished her glass of red wine and said, Mademoiselle, would you permit me to buy you another wine? The girl looked at her watch and scowled. I must go back to my room, but if you want to, I would appreciate it. Ricard went to the bar and brought back 2 glasses of wine. What brings you out in the storm? Ricard said. The girl shrugged. I couldn't bear to stay in that little room any longer, so I called a friend, but he hasn't shown up. Your boyfriend? Oh, of a sort. What brings you out tonight, monsieur? Ricard. Paul Ricard. I'm called Sabine. What brings me out in the storm, Sabine, is that I'm locked out of my apartment. So I'm trying to figure out where to go. All the hotels are full. You really have nowhere to stay? Again she looked at her watch. Curfew will be in a little while. You'll have to go somewhere. Ricard shrugged and smiled. She was a pretty girl, he thought, with thick black hair and full lips, not pink, almost red, even though she wore no lipstick. Well, Sabine said, I have a room. Not much. A student room, but you can stay there tonight.
That would be very kind of you, Ricard said, gratitude warming his heart.
Sabine laughed. Wait till you see the room. Maybe you won't be so grateful.
Preparing to go out into the storm, she drew a red wool muffler around her face, just below her eyes, and pulled her hat, a roomy version of a beret, down to her eyebrows.
Now I'm ready, she said.
As Ricard prepared to go, he said, "It might not be a good idea to have me in your room. The Gestapo's after me, so you could get into real trouble."
Let's go, she said. I can't worry about the Boche, because that's what they want me to do.
As they approached the door, Sabine said,
What did you do to get the Boche after you?
Better if I don't tell you, but they would really like to arrest me. Out on the street, the two bent against the wind, walking carefully in the snow.
I'm already cold, Sabine said. Put your arm around my shoulders.
As Ricard held her, she drew him against her by circling her arm around his waist.
There, she said. Now we look like a couple. A nice student couple. What is it you do, Paul?
I write books.
I don't think I've read them, she said. In my literature class we only go to the 19th century. Stendhal, the poet Gautier. Are you famous?
Well known for what I do. I'm a genre novelist. I write about detectives and spies. Sabine turned them right on the Rue Saint-Jacques.
Not far now,
she said. From some distance, Ricard heard the rumble of a powerful engine. Sabine stopped and said,
What's that?
A Citroën Traction Avant, the SS favorite. Ricard knew that the officers in the Gestapo car were looking for him. He could hear the car stop, then the slam of a door, and after half a minute the door slammed again, and the Citroën moved down the street. It was difficult for Ricard to hear over the sound of the wind, and standing still, trying to pick up direction, was the only way to do it. First the sound moved closer, and Sabine put a hand on his arm. Then the car stopped again, an officer searching the shadowed doorways, he thought. Then it moved away. Suddenly a blast of sound rose above the wind, a loud hailer, a bullhorn. The voice had the metallic ring of speech amplified by a microphone. "Ricard, we know you're out here. Give yourself up and it will go easier for you." "Let's try for your room," Ricard whispered. They set off up the Rue Saint-Jacques, past shuttered stores and restaurants. The owners had, because of the storm, gone home. Ricard and Sabine tried to walk quickly over the frozen snow. Then a single word from the loudhailer. "Halt!" The Citroën was, Ricard guessed, maybe a block away. But they'd been seen. Ricard knelt down and started to open his valise, meaning to get hold of the 7.65 automatic and try to chase the Citroën away. Then shots rang out, 4 or 5, and instinctively Ricard stood and started to run, Sabine at his side. A few seconds later, Ricard slipped and fell face down on the snow. "Are you wounded?" Sabine said. "No," Ricard said. "I fell." Then Sabine sank down to her knees. "I'm shot," she said. "Merde. It hurts. Help me, Paul." Desperately, Ricard looked around him and saw a small park, the Jardin de Navarre, it was called. In the spring, he'd sat on a bench there and read a book. Now he said, "Can you walk?" "Yes, I have to." Ricard helped her to her feet and they ran towards the park. This didn't take much time, just enough for another "halt" from the Gestapo officer. As they entered the park, Ricard looked desperately for a place to hide. A moment later he saw the fountain,
turned off for the winter, but fountains, he knew, had an operating apparatus hidden beneath them. "Over there," Ricard said. But as he started to move, Sabine again sank to her knees. "Save yourself, Paul," she said. "No," Ricard said, and hauled Sabine to her feet as she gasped from the pain. As they reached the fountain, there were more shots fired from the citron, but Ricard barely noticed. Beneath the fountain, an old wooden door. Ricard pushed against it, but it was locked. Then he stood on one leg and smashed his heel against the door, in the place where he calculated the lock would be, and the door opened. The Gestapo looked for them in the park. Through cracks at the edge of the door, Ricard could see torch beams, hunting this way and that. And at one point a Gestapo officer stood somewhere nearby and said in German-accented French, his voice loud, "Well, I guess they are not here." Then a few minutes later, with the icy cold and the wind, they'd had enough of searching and went off to find different victims. Ricard and Sabine made it back to Sabine's room on the Rue Saint-Jacques, where Sabine took her shirt off, and Ricard got a look at the bullet wound in Sabine's back just below her shoulder blade. It had bled very little, and they both thought this had something to do with the cold. "Do you have a telephone?" Ricard said. "On a little table at the foot of the stairs." Ricard called Leila's number, left a message, and Leila immediately called back. "I'm with a friend who has a bullet wound, and we need a doctor." "It's after curfew," Leila said. "Can it wait?" "I don't think so." "Give me the address and wait in the vestibule. A delivery van will pick you up and take you to a doctor." "A delivery van? After curfew?" "He has papers that say he delivers medical supplies. He can go anywhere, at any time." The doctor's office was in the Avenue Montaigne, which meant a wealthy, upper-class clientele. Ricard rang the bell, and the doctor himself let them in, the concierge gone for the night. The doctor had white hair, was maybe 60, and was wearing a plaid bathrobe and pyjamas. "Come in," he said. "Your friend is waiting for you." As the doctor took Sabine into his examining room, Ricard and Leila sat on a couch in the office reception. "Will your friend be all right?" Leila said. "I think so. I had a look at the wound. The bullet hit at an angle, maybe came out somewhere in her armpit, though I didn't see anything there. She's lucky. If the bullet had entered in a straight line, it would have gone through her heart." "How do you come to know her?" "I don't. I couldn't go home. I still can't. Can't go anywhere without being caught. There are circulars posted all over Paris. Anyhow, I was in a cafe near the Mont Sainte-Geneviève, where she said I could stay in her room. On the way there, the Boche caught up to us and fired a few shots. I doubt they know they hit anything." "The Gestapo guards every hospital and clinic in Paris, looking for gunshot wounds." "I know. Thank heaven for the doctor," Ricard said. "Yes, he's a well-known internist, but at night he's a resistance doctor." Leila paused a moment, then said, "I have news to relay to you, Ricard. Important news from the people in London, the civil servants who run at least some of the networks, the escape lines, the safe houses, all of it. They've asked me to tell you that, for the moment at least, your days of fighting the occupation are over. You're now like some kind of poisonous plant. It's not safe to be anywhere near you, so it's time to go. To leave France. You can refuse, of course. They will accept your answer politely, but if it's the wrong answer, if it's, 'No, I won't,' you'll be dead in an hour. That's how it has to be done, chérie. I'm sure you understand." Ricard thought it over, what it would mean to him, and then said, "If I have to run, Leila, will you run with me?" "I will. I'm in love with you, Ricard. I won't let you go." "And Kasia?" "She must also leave. She's being told as we sit here." "All right, Leila. We'll run. Where will we be safe?
Spain at first. Then, in time, Istanbul. My family will take care of us, and Turkey is a neutral state, so you'll be safe there.
And when do we leave?
Tomorrow. The doctor will let us stay here overnight.
Kasia travelled west, crossing the frontier into Switzerland. In time reaching a chalet deep in the mountains where a very rich woman friend meant to wait out the war. Kasia was greeted warmly by good friends from Paris and given a glass of well-aged Burgundy.
"Will you go back to Paris?" her friend asked. "Maybe someday," Kasia said. "For now, I am very tired. Is there somewhere I can rest?" "Your bedroom is upstairs," her friend said. "Come, I'll show you where. And I have a nightgown you can wear."
Layla and Ricard fled south, on the old roads from village to village, from Combre to Retournac to Saint-Ostien. Somewhere beyond the Loire, the snow had gone, revealing winter fields. Sometimes they took local trains, 3-carriage trains that rattled along at 20 miles an hour and stopped at tiny stations. Once they took an old bus that belched blue smoke from its exhaust pipe. Sometimes they rode in farmers' wagons pulled by old horses. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they saw church steeples in the distance, which meant villages with little hotels. The skies were blue in the south, where a weak sun suggested that spring might come, some day in the months ahead. In time they reached a village on the coast, and there found a grizzled old rogue with a milky eye, who took them by felucca to a village in Spain. The village had an 8-room hotel, and they stayed there for a few days. As they lay in bed one morning, a breeze ruffling the sheer curtains by an open window, they talked about the future, about the end of the war, about, someday, going back to Paris. You've been listening to a Weidenfeld and Nicholson audiobook, Under Occupation by Alan First, read by Peter Noble. Produced by Steve Chase for ID Audio. The text is copyright 2019 by Alan First. The recording is copyright 2019 by Orion Publishing Group Limited. For information about other Orion audiobooks, visit the website at orionbooks.co.uk.